If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, late night drivers, long-haul truckers, and others who travel dark forested roads or rural highways at night, have you ever had chilling encounters with the paranormal, strange creatures, cryptids, or other eerie phenomena? What's your story? A couple of months ago, I was driving home late at night from work. I can't remember what time it was, but it was well past 1 a.m. sure. I was a bit tired, but I have been worse and have never seen anything of the sort. I could see a figure in the distance. I saw the head and torso, but it was just a black figure. The road was really dark. My brain instantly thought, well done for crossing while I'm coming at you, so I started slowing down until I almost came to a complete stop. The moment my headlights hit the figure, it vanished, my heart dropped to my stomach, and I felt all the color drain from my face. Mind you, I take this route home every day, sometimes even later than this, and this has never happened before. I keep thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw. It was there one moment and gone the next. It was freaky. I saw something paranormal while driving. A bit about me is that I love supernatural stuff. Cryptids in particular have always been my favorites. For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by them, especially shapeshifters, werewolves, and the like. I always try to keep an open mind for that stuff because, in my opinion, we don't know enough about the world to completely discredit these things. Now, on to what happened. I'm fully aware this could have been my eyes playing tricks on me, but I don't think it was. I was going out to grab supper for my parents. We ordered out at a restaurant, so I went to pick it up. At this point, it's dark. Very dark, cloudy night. There is no moon visible at that time of night. So I'm driving. The roads are mostly bare as it's a weeknight. A handful of cars are in front of me, probably heading downtown. The street lights were particularly dim, it seemed, as I drove, minding my business. Jamming out a little to the radio is typical driving alone shit. My eyes catch something on the sidewalk that nearly makes me slam on the brake. About 60 yards ahead, I see a massive black wolf or dog-like figure walking up the sidewalk. I swear it had eyeshine and everything. I blinked several times, my eyes flicking between the road and the sidewalk, so as not to crash. This thing makes eye contact with me with huge, glowing amberish eyes. I remember feeling a cold sense of dread in my stomach, and I blink hard again, and it's gone. In its place was a man. I kept driving on, of course. But I still can't get it out of my mind. I wasn't overly tired or distracted. And it was just such a real feeling. I'll admit, it could be my eyes playing tricks on me. But I don't think so. Does anyone have any ideas what it could be? I have seen my fair share of spirits in different forms of visibility, the cliché shadow out of the eye kind, ones that I see when I'm riding in a car and I look out of the window and they seem like real solid people. But then I look back and they are gone. Once I saw one that looked so real that I can tell you that she had light blown hair and a floral 80s style dress down to halfway between her knee and her ankle. I once saw a shadow man with a hat on with his back facing me, probably about 6 feet or maybe taller. But today I was in the kitchen at my mom's, and she already put up the Christmas tree because she finds that the lights are calming, and I swear that I saw either something sit up or rise up from beneath the carpet, out of the corner of my eye, of course. But here is the thing that makes it different from the other ones I mentioned above. It was this dark gray mist. It wasn't solid. I have never heard of a spirit appearing as a gray mist, so I have no clue what it was. If anyone has an explanation for this weird phenomenon, then feel free to explain it in the comments, even if it's not a paranormal explanation. In rural East Texas, I was driving through some very thick fog on a back road. I could only go about 25 miles per hour since I could barely see the road in front of me. An important part of this story is that I was driving an old pickup truck without a lift. After creeping forward down the road for a good while and being scared out of my mind, I got the feeling that I could see the outline of something up ahead, and I should slow down more and try to move to the side of the road. As I got closer, I could tell that the outline I saw was a dead hog, common for East Texas, but it was one of the biggest hogs I've seen. Easily 400 pounds, less common, and then it started to move. It lurched to the side of the road a few times, like it was being dragged by something. I thought, wow, that's a strong person. Should I help them move it so no one gets in a wreck? But before I stopped my truck completely and got out, the thing that was moving this 400+ pound hog stood up. And I found myself at eye level with the largest dog I've ever seen in my life. This dog stood, looking me directly in the eyes, while I sat in the driver's seat of an old Chevy truck. I've honestly never seen anything this big before, and I wasn't sure if this was a farm dog or a werewolf. Not only was it shockingly tall, but it had the mass and strength to drag a behemoth by itself. It had shaggy white fur, so it reminded me of a Pyrenees, but it was easily 1.5 times the height. It took us probably 15 seconds of shock, on both parts, of staring before I said duck this shit and rocketed out of there. After I got home, going 50 now, I thought about, damn, not only was that a monster, it was smart enough to move the hog off the road before eating it. I'm convinced to this day it was some East Texas old god. I was driving back from Columbus to my town near Cleveland relatively late at night. Part of the drive involves going down this 2-lane country road called 301. At night, you will usually be the only car for miles in any direction, and it is almost entirely straight except for a couple slight bends. I was driving fairly fast, trying to get home, and then, when going around one of the bends, I noticed someone walking in the middle of the lane. I slammed on my brakes and swerved into the other lane. At first, I thought the person was wearing all black, but when I slowed down, I realized they had no face or anything. It's then that it finally registered with me that it was a solid black mist perfectly in the shape of a person. It freaked me out, so I stepped back on the gas and got out of there. The whole thing lasted only a couple seconds, but it felt like it lasted much longer. I was heading home after a night of door dashing, coming back from a drop-off in a very upscale/ritzy area that was also secluded in the woods that border old farmlands. I'm pretty familiar with this area, as I have lived within 20 minutes of it for most of my life. As I was turning onto the road, I saw what I thought was a deer crossing, so I slowed down, then slammed on my brakes when I actually saw it in the headlights. Although it appeared to be a deer, something about it felt strange. It was larger than the usual whitetail, and its skin looked like it was rotting off its body. Its back was sort of hunched, and its rear legs from about the knees down were nothing but broken, bony stumps. I was driving a Suburban at the time. Its back was level, if not a little taller than the hood of my truck, and a sense of foreboding came over me as it turned to look at me. That's when I saw that it was definitely not just a messed up deer. It did not have a deer head, or antlers, but more of a human-like skull, round, almost like a basic smiley face, but with black voids where its eyes should be and longer, straight black hair, like human hair. We stared at each other for about 20 seconds, and then it just faded away into nothing. Moved to Northeast PA and have seen this figure twice more, both times driving home late at night, but in different locations. Once on the Luzerne/Lackawanna County line, and the other along some back county road, both in mountainous, heavily wooded areas. Both times I could sense it right before I saw it, the same eerie, foreboding feeling, and I would break out in goosebumps. Have I indeed seen a wendigo, or is it something else entirely? I was driving around Maryland, specifically the Fort Howard area, before entering the actual park past the gates. If anybody is familiar with this area, it was around 8:50 p.m., so it was dark. This area is near a state park and has a lot of wooded areas. I was driving and felt the urge to glance to my left, and I saw something I had never seen in my entire life. I see this white, human-like creature. It was just a pure white color that looked blackish gray in some areas, like it was in dirt or ash of some sort, and it had just these two black eyes. There are no other distinguishable facial features. No clothes, no real defining fractures other than a skinny, lanky body, and black eyes. It had a noticeable protruding ribcage as well. I get freaked out, drive further away from the area, and pull over to regain myself. I have a Bluetooth transmitter for my radio, and as soon as I start to slow down and pull over my radio, it changes from the station I had set to a completely different station that is 3 stations away from the one I had. I would try to change it back, and then it would go to static and white noise. I finally figured it out. Once I started to pull away from the area, it went back to that same station it changed to before, and the lights inside my car came on, but the knob wasn't switched to the lights being on. I drive an older car, and the switch to turn the lights inside the car on is to the left of my steering wheel with a sliding knob so I can adjust the brightness, and when I turn the lights on, I can feel it click, but when I went to turn them off, it didn't click, so the light wasn't turned manually on. This was pretty brief, and the lights switched off on their own again after a little bit. I turned around and sped back towards my friend's house so I could drop her off. I'm feeling quite uneasy still. And the fact that I've had this car for about 3 months and have never had a glitch like this was very odd. When I dropped said friend off, I started to get a wave of exhaustion just creeping over me, and I've been feeling tired and drained ever since. I would just like anybody's input on this, and if anybody has some sort of idea of what this could have been or an explanation. Truck driver here. In my first year of trucking, I was driving up to a meat distributor in Hiram, Utah. I had to go through a small town. Unfortunately, I had been given the order at like 2 a.m., so at 3 a.m., I was making my way up there to pick up a preloaded trailer. My best friend on the opposite side of the country had called me to talk while I got this load because I was really tired. I swear I saw a small person or child run in front of my semi-truck. I slammed on my brakes. I stopped my truck. All with my friend on my Bluetooth headset. I got out in the snow and walked around looking for something, anything. To prove I wasn't crazy, I couldn't find anything. But the thing, a small person, a child, seemed so realistic but was freaking out. After not finding a dent, blood splatter, or body, my friend convinced me to get back in my truck and keep moving. It was still one of my weirdest experiences around the country. Around 10 to 15 years ago, I and a friend were driving down River Road when some winged creature swooped the hood of my car, surrounding and blocking both the windshield and wrapping around the passenger and driver's side windows, and then disappeared. As we're driving, I'm telling her about this sleep paralysis demon I saw in a dream. The creature resembles a winged, molten stone demon with red eyes, imprisoned within a stone prison, yet it manages to escape and pursue me. It's dark outside, possibly 9 or 10 p.m., and while I'm narrating this story, something falls from the sky, or a tree, and swoops down onto the hood of my car, filling my entire windshield and wrapping around my side windows like wings. My friend screams, and I stop the car. I remember it now as an owl with feathery wings, but part of me remembers red eyes, black fleshy wings, and a human face. Not sure if this is due to the images that ran through my head as I recounted the event. There are owls where we were, so I was wondering if maybe that's something owls do, swoop headlights or something, but there are no owls that would be large enough to explain what I saw, just barn owls around, and I've seen them before. I thought I'd ask around if anyone else had ever experienced something like this, as it's always bothered me, and my friend is sick of me asking her what she remembers. She just says it was weird, and she was too scared and closed her eyes. Has anyone else had an owl or large bird swoop into their car hood? Is there a cryptid that fits this description, or is it a bird that swoops into cars? Anything would help. My uncle kept having dreams about him driving. In his dream, he would drive around this cliff area when he came to this sharp curve that was unguarded on the side that was so steep that it basically ran to the bottom of the mountain. When he got to this corner, his tire suddenly just exploded. Same tire for every dream. He would then have an out-of-body experience and watch his car drive off of the cliff, and he would fly out of the car and tumble down the hill, mangling himself the whole way down. He would then lay on the hill for 5 days without being found. He kept having this dream for about a month. It officially creeped him out to the point where he went to the auto repair shop to get it checked out. It turns out that there was a flaw in the exact same tire that was blowing up in his dream that would have made the tire explode without warning. They didn't know how much longer it would have been, but they said that he was lucky that he came in when he did. The dream stopped after that. A couple months later, he went to visit my grandma and granddad while he was driving somewhere very familiar. That's when he realized it was the exact same cliff in his dream. He stopped the car, pulled over, and stepped out to take a breather. He had taken the route before, but the cliff had never stood out to him. Although our family is very religious, he never really believed in it. But he swears that something out there is protecting him. When he told me and my sister this story, he was shaking because it still scares him to this day. He truly believes that he would have died on that day. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house on a rural country road in Indiana. It is exactly midnight. On my left, in the distance, I see what I believe to be people standing on the side of the road, but I dismiss it and attribute it to my mind making up things. As I get closer, I realize that it is people. Standing on the side of the road are 3 women, completely still with a blank expression, looking ahead. They all had a different colored dress with the same design. Red, green, and yellow. They each had a bonnet on as well. It gave me the chills, as I was in the middle of nowhere and could not make up any logical explanation for this. Any similar encounters? To begin with, no one in my family has a history of mental illness involving hallucinations or psychosis, and we were both completely sober. My mom and I were driving together on the Blue Ridge Parkway back toward our home in North Carolina, near the Appalachian Trail. I was driving, and my mom was in the passenger seat. It was an overcast day with little rain spurts here and there. We were riding home, conversing about normal stuff, when suddenly my mom gasped and said, "What the hell was that?" in a panicked voice. My mom is a brave woman. She doesn't scare or upset easily, but she sounded startled. I said, "What? Where?" I hadn't seen anything. She said, "It just crossed the road." Several yards ahead of me, according to my mom, a large, bipedal, but hunched over creature of some kind crossed the road in front of the approaching curve in the road ahead. I was going about 45 miles per hour, and she said it was a decent few yards away in the road. I took 2 large steps and walked into the woods up ahead. She said it was large enough to take only 2 steps across the road and definitely was not a man. She said both feet stayed on the ground, so it wasn't galloping deer. She said it was gray and looked hairy, but not shaggy, but still had fur, not clothing. She didn't see any facial features, but it appeared to be fur covered from head to toe, broad and wide, and solid colored. It had a smaller head, but she couldn't make out any distinguishing features on its face. I do not think it was a man. I didn't see it, but my mom is convinced that she saw a cryptid. Does anybody have info on possible animals, both cryptid and discovered, that this could have been in the Appalachian Mountains? This is something I saw in early June of 2009 while I was stationed at the now FT. Cavazos, featuring hood back then. A little background first and full transparency, this is not something that I really ever brought up to people because I thought I might have imagined it, but it always stuck in my mind and gave me the weird, cold in the gut feeling. I'm just going to relay what I saw. I was a big monster/cryptid/paranormal fan growing up and was always open to the idea of that stuff being real. So the event. I was able to get my CO to grant me a 24-hour pass during a work week because my brother and his wife were expecting their first child in San Antonio, and my oldest brother had gone on leave and was also going to be there for the arrival of our niece or nephew. CO had instructed me to be back in uniform by 1,000 the next day. Pass in hand, I load up and head out towards San Antonio. From the post, I would normally take 195 south through a lot of back roads and farmland. It skips a lot of traffic on 35 and drops you back on the main highway right before Georgetown. There really isn't much on that stretch of road, though, mostly farmland on either side and small towns with 10 to 15 miles of nothing in between. Arrive with no problem in San Antonio and spend the day with family at the hospital until my niece is born around 9 p.m. that evening. I decide that I'm going to head back to post that evening, so after all, I head out around 2230. I pass through Georgetown, then take 195 north a little after 2 o'clock. 195 was dark back then. I don't know if it's gotten more lights out there now, but it was not a spot to be without a light source. Especially after passing through the small towns. Street lights may appear every few hundred yards. I'm driving along at 55/60ths of a mile per hour and really haven't passed any other vehicles since leaving 35. I pass one of those rare street lights, and I feel like I notice something on the side of the road, leaving the glow of the light. I look out my window, and it's right there, running along the fence line on all fours, keeping pace with my truck for a satisfying quarter mile. It looked like a big wolf with long front arms, and after looking at the speedometer again and back out the window, it looked over at me. I looked around for any other vehicles and switched my headlights over to running lights, rolled my window down to try and see better, and placed cruise control on to start slowing down a little bit. I could hear this thing's footfalls, and it was huffing while it ran. I could see its jaws opening and closing while it ran. From what I could estimate from the farmland fence, its shoulders came up to at least 4 feet. Something in my primate brain said GTFO, this thing had started to run at a shallow angle, taking it closer to me, and my big brain had slowed my truck to 40. That made me hit the accelerator and get out of there, seeing it start cutting back toward the farmland away from the road. I got to my barracks and said, WTF, that was weird. Must have been dreaming. I shrugged and put it out of my mind because it creeped me out and made me feel uneasy. So while I never forgot it, it's one of those things that still gets under my skin. I like watching the cryptid/weird documentaries and all that stuff when I'm not doing anything at home. Around 8 months ago, I watched the Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State. I knew about the Michigan Dogmen but was surprised to hear that they were down in Texas. My duty station is located right in that area. That's when it started to fall into place as to what it was. I just wanted to share what happened to me. Since the beginning of the pandemic until now, I've been working as a travel paramedic across the country. I've worked everywhere, from New York City to LA, and on Native American reservations in South Dakota. During my travels, I've seen some eerie things and had strange encounters. A lot of the strangeness occurred in Pennsylvania, of all places. PA was one of my first travel jobs during the pandemic. Typically, I was in a new city at a new hotel every week. I've been all over the state, typically driving 100 to 300 miles a day through winding mountain roads. Pennsylvania can be a strange place at night, especially with a lack of street lighting on many roads. On one occasion, while driving down a back road through central Pennsylvania, a giant dog hopped the guardrail and ran in front of my truck. It looked like a husky or coyote, but it was larger than any dog or coyote should be. On all fours, its head was at the hood of my truck. A 2020 Dodge 2500, The hood of the truck is 6 feet from the ground. It made prolonged eye contact with me with sharp, piercing yellow eyes as it crossed the road and continued into the woods. Flash forward a few months, I'm in the Philadelphia area. The area my hotel occupies is newly developed, so the parking lot is well lit, but the surrounding area is wooded and dark. I'm often awake until the early morning hours and keep my blinds open. The other night, I was looking out the window and saw an odd white shape in the parking lot. It was absolutely featureless from what I could tell, kind of like a blob with thick, short legs. I was so shocked that I did a double take before it vanished. A few nights later, I was lying in bed watching TV. A window opens blinds. I heard this odd noise. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like a baby's cry, but muffled and raspy, and it sounded like it was being carried away as if a strong gust of wind was blowing it out of the ear. I heard it 3 times and saw nothing out of my window. But I have never heard a sound like that. I thought maybe it was a fox or some other kind of animal, but it was way too close to humans and just not human enough to be written off as such. Could this possibly be a crawler? I used to know a DNR officer who ran an ATV park in western Iowa. This park had mostly thick wooded trails. He gave my friends and I permission to camp there next to a river under the condition that we always left with more trash than we came with. We do this anyway. Our campsite was about 1 mile from the parking lot. The parking lot was gated off with a 6 fence and a motorized steel gate blocking the entrance, not one of those flimsy single pole gates that flips up. This thing was as tall as the fence and slid on rails open and shut. There is no way in the park if you're out or out if you're in once the gate is locked unless you climb the fence or you're a DNR official. We normally took our quads to and from if we needed them back at our vehicles, but late one night, about 11:30 or so, we all, 7 of us, decided to hike it to grab some more supplies. As we came in view of the lot, which was 300 yards, we could see taillights in the parking lot. Well, what the duck? The DNR officer was always off work at sunset. I sent him a quick text asking him if he was working. He didn't reply, presumably because he was asleep. I then thought to myself, maybe it's the local PD. As we got about 75 yards away from it, it looked like an old 1970s style 4-door car. Now we are all really confused, since we were there when the DNR guy shut and locked the gate for the night. There were no other vehicles in the lot except ours. We get even closer to it, and it speeds off and drives cleanly through the closed steel gate, all without making a noise and simply disappearing. My heart pounded out of my chest because I knew what I had just witnessed. Now, mind you, we felt that this park was already haunted, as we would always see shadow figures in the distance, but as we approached them, they'd disappear. We've tried to debunk it but have never been able to come up with a logical explanation. I was on a camping trip with some friends, and we had camped about a few miles out from the nearest town on a small mountain. It was around 7 and was starting to get dark, and we were just setting up camp when we noticed we were fairly short on firewood but had enough for an hour or two. Feeling kind of peckish and wanting to get some snacks, I offered to drive down to town to grab some firewood and said that I'd be back in less than an hour. A couple of my other friends jumped at the option to go as there was no cell service at the campsite, so we all gathered in my car and drove to town. It was about a 20-minute drive, give or take, and we had gotten in and out of the grocery store with the bare essentials plus a few gummy bears and trail mix pretty fast. We actually sped back to the campsite, and I know for a fact we were making good time because we had just barely gotten to the start of the mountain in less than 10 minutes before I had to slow down a bit because we saw a cop car on the side of the road. Before we had pulled up to the campsite, we saw that the fire had completely diminished and all of our friends had piled into our other friends' cars. When we got out, they got out and confronted us, asking where we had been and what took us so long. They said that the fire had gone out hours ago and that they were just about ready to leave and go home because they thought we had gotten into a wreck. Confused, we said that we had only been out for less than an hour, but our friends pointed out now that it was in fact 11, and that we had been missing for almost 3 to 4 hours. We swore up and down that we weren't gone for long, but our friends didn't believe it, thinking we had just ducked about and lost track of time. To this day, we still don't understand where those extra few hours went on that drive. Back in 1995, my ex and I were driving from Langley AFB, VA, to Columbus, Ohio. We were on Route 33 between Harrisonburg, Virginia, and Elkins, West Virginia. It felt very Appalachian. To our right, just off the highway, and in the forest, there was something very large and gray moving parallel to us. We only saw it for a moment, as I was probably doing 80 miles per hour. We didn't get a good look at it because it was obscured by the trees, and I was speeding. It looked like the side of an elephant, no head, just this big, gray body walking. I said to my ex-wife, "Did you see that?" She replied, "WTF was that?" We were both shocked. We later joked it was Baby the dinosaur because we were kids from the 80s. I've seen strange things before and since, but nothing tops that. I haven't thought about it in probably 10 years, but I was talking to my wife and son this morning about weird things, and it came up. I googled WV cryptids and found the Grafton monster. My memory is fuzzy, but this is close to what I saw. That's it. That's the story I just wanted to share. I've seen strange people on the road, tearing up a bit here. My boyfriend was driving me home along a road with hills on one side and houses on the other. We see 2 men and 2 women from far away, and they look like they are all doing some weird tranced out walk across the street, from the houses to the empty rolling hillside, no crosswalk, just an open road, single file, nondescript close. As we get closer, they all freeze in the street mid-motion, like those Egyptian hieroglyphs, every one in place, unmoving. We drove around them, kept going in silence, and finally got to my house. What was that? Okay, let's not talk about it. 5 or 6 years before this, I was sleeping in the backseat with a previous boyfriend in his car along an old country road around Santa Rosa, California. I wake up, our heads are toward the passenger side, he's against the seat sleeping, I'm on the outside against him, and through the driver's front window, I see a man with a hood watching us sleep. I can't see his face, just the hood and dark hair. I lightly nudge my partner and say quietly, "Shh, wake up now, something is watching us. Don't move, don't make noise, I do not think it's human." My boyfriend wakes up suddenly, freezes, and slowly processes what I'm saying. I say driver's window love. He turns his head and shoulders to look, and this thing rides away fast, pedaling in black rags away on a bike I didn't previously see under it, off down this long country road in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. We are confused and don't feel safe. We are slightly curious, though, right? I guess. Okay, let's try to go back to sleep. He says it was just some guy on a bike seeing why a car was parked here, even though it's a seriously strange time and place for that. I didn't go back to sleep, and neither did he. We lay there still. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or so pass, and there's a strange howling, like wind and voices. In the distance coming close. We perk up, only to see, I swear to God, at 40 to 50 miles per hour, a bike roaring towards us. It goes right by close to the car. Howling, long black tattered cloaks waving in the wind, and a pale body, something not human, something making the forest and wind scream, too fast to be human. I don't think it was even pedaling anymore, it was just flying and howling. We clapped in the front seat so fast and booked it out of there. This happened back in the summer of 2013, when I was 13. My mom and I were in Florida visiting my grandma and aunt. After spending the week or so at grandma's place in Odessa, we drove north to St. Augustine to spend the next week at a hotel by the beach and visit my aunt as well. On the second night, we were driving to pick up my aunt, who was working the night shift at Denny's. On the drive, there was a guy walking down the road with his back facing us with a backpack and all. Possibly homeless. It was dark and right by a stretch of woods, so my mom didn't see him at first and nearly hit him. When she notices and swerves to avoid the vehicular manslaughter charges, I look out the window to see who this guy is. Nothing about the guy walking seemed out of the ordinary, it's what I saw behind him that still sticks with me. It was this humanoid creature that was crouched down, looking like it might have already been eating something. Keep in mind I was in a moving vehicle, so I couldn't get the best look at it, but it almost looked to have old, ripped up clothes on and a bit of hair on its head, like a human. But it's the eyes, they were huge. They glowed, too, just like when you see an animal's eyes looking at you at night. When it looked up, it snarled, and I could almost see its teeth. They looked sharp, like they could bite right through you with no effort. Its skin was almost white with a tint of green, and it looked skinny and long. Knees up to its head when crouching. It had to have been no more than 10 feet away from the pedestrian walking on the side of the road. It took me a minute to register what the duck I just saw and if it was even what I thought it was, which I still, almost 9 years later, couldn't tell you. I was just quiet and in shock for the rest of the night. My mom, aunt, and I went back to the hotel room. They drank and caught up, while I just tried to watch TV and not think about what I saw that night. I still don't know what I saw. My knowledge of Florida cryptids is very limited, and I don't think it was a skinwalker since they are more in the southwest part of the US than the southeast. If anyone has any ideas, please leave them in the comments. While driving along Highway 50, east, between Camino and Old Hamstown with my wife in the afternoon in California, I witnessed something that was unmistakable and unquestionable. The problem is that what I saw couldn't be real, according to current academia and public knowledge. I'll give my best description, and hopefully someone will give me a name I can research. Now, eastbound 50 in the afternoon means you have the sun directly in the eyes of all drivers. Nonetheless, I saw what looked like a very tall, skinny humanoid type entity, all white, head to toe, and whatever clothing it has. It was moving in the eastbound lane near the center divide, following the oncoming traffic heading west. It moves by speed warping 5 to 15 feet ahead of its previous location, pauses for a few seconds, and then warps to the next spot. For a few seconds, I could clearly see this object, but then it would blur to the next spot before becoming clear again. I couldn't believe cars weren't swerving or braking from this thing. As soon as it detected my presence, it swiftly steered directly towards my wife's window. With my jaw firmly planted on the ground, it seemed to move in slow motion, giving me a look of amusement. This thing didn't put off pure evil vibes, and I felt nothing but shock at what I was seeing. It didn't appear to be a benign entity, rather, it seemed to hover somewhere in the middle, capable of either action. So I grew up in northwest Indiana, on the outskirts of the Chicagoland area. This encounter happened in 2021, though I don't remember the month. It happened before I moved out of my mother's house, and the trees had full foliage, so it was late spring to midsummer. The night that it happened, I was hanging out at my boyfriend's apartment. I hung out there almost every night of the week and would return home at around 10 to 11 p.m. It was always dark when I drove home, and until this night, I had never really seen anything weird. It was only a 5-minute drive from my boyfriend's apartment to my mother's house. About halfway through the drive, there is an intersection. If you go straight, you will drive onto a short stretch of winding road with woods on both sides. On one side of the road, there is a small trail that follows it and cuts through some of the woods. It is a very beautiful place to walk during the day, and it is a great place to spot deer in the morning. At the end of the road, there is another intersection that meets a larger, busier road, which I would use to get to my mother's house. The trail turns into a normal sidewalk at this intersection. So I'm driving on this stretch of road, and I'm getting close to the next intersection. There are no street lamps, so the only light source is coming from my headlights. The trail is to the right of me, and I see this tall, lanky shadow start to walk out of the tree line. As I pass, it continues to walk straight towards the road, almost right into my car. Now, I didn't really process what I saw until I had already passed it, so I didn't stop or even slow down. Despite this, it appeared to not care that it almost walked right into my car. It didn't even hesitate. It almost felt as though it knew I was coming. Once I realized what I saw, I started freaking the duck out. I got to the intersection, but the light was red. I sat there, terrified, waiting for the light to turn green, afraid that it was following me. After what felt like an eternity, the light turned green, and I sped the rest of the way home. Now, let me give you guys a more detailed physical description of this shadow figure. It was completely black, with no discernible features. Even in my headlights. It was at least 8 to 9 feet tall. Very long, skinny arms and legs. It was bipedal, and she walked with a large stride. Its head was round and looked a little small compared to the other proportions of the body. Definitely human-shaped. I don't think it was a crawler, due to its shadow-like appearance and how comfortably it walked on 2 legs. It definitely wasn't a person. Also, on a side note, a friend of mine had a terrifying experience while biking down this same trail at night. He heard what sounded like a woman screaming. I don't know if those incidents are connected, but it's interesting to think about. I know foxes can make some crazy noises sometimes, so who knows? Anyway, I would love to hear what others think about this or if they have seen something similar. So, last night, I was driving back from a trip heading to Novi Sad, Vojvodina, Serbia. Near the village of Perij, I experienced something really strange. It was around 10 p.m. when I saw a very tall figure appear out of nowhere on the road. It stayed there for a few seconds before quickly sliding into the bushes and trees on the right side. The figure was about 2 meters tall and didn't look like a person or animal, though its movement seemed somewhat familiar. The figure appeared blurry and gray, or so it seemed. I was driving at about 90 kilometers per hour, so I didn't have much time to react. My car has automatic high beams, and they turned off and on again, as if another car were passing, but there were no other cars around. When I reached the spot where it disappeared, I looked in the direction it went but saw nothing. Then, when I checked my rearview mirror, I saw it again near the trees. This time, it was still, but I quickly lost sight of it. I asked my boyfriend if he saw it too, but he was looking the other way and didn't notice anything. I wasn't under the influence of any medications, drugs, or alcohol, so it wasn't that. When we arrived, I opened maps to see what was behind those bushes and trees. As it turns out, there's a cemetery as large as the village itself. The whole night, I kept getting goosebumps thinking about it. I'm not sure if it was a ghost or something else. I've never seen a ghost or experienced anything paranormal firsthand. Does anyone have any explanations for what it might have been? I am not one to truly believe in cryptids or skinwalkers, per se, but I started this account a couple of years ago. I can't shake it. A friend and I decided to drive to Ennis to see The Purge, Anarchy on a Sunday afternoon. I had never been to the drive-in movie theater, and he said it would be an experience to see that particular movie there. After the movie finished, we were driving around on the service road, trying to find a gas station to make it back to North Dallas. My friend was driving my car, and I was on the passenger side, looking out at the older houses. In one house that we passed, there was a man, but not a man by the mailbox. His body was contorted and severely emaciated, and he was rocking and scratching himself. His face was long and a bit demented. I asked my friend if he saw it, and he said yes, it was a skinwalker. I was in disbelief, so I asked him to turn the car around so I could confirm what we saw. He obliged, but when we got back to that same area, it was gone. I thought it could potentially be a man on some severe drugs, but his limbs were way too long to have been a man. Has anyone ever had an experience like this? For some background, my great-grandma, who passed away in 2010, came from a family of Swiss immigrants who arrived in the US in the late 19th century. They owned a bunch of land near Montpelier, Idaho, where they worked on a dairy farm. This area is pretty rural, and back then, I imagine it was even less populated, so the story might seem all the more creepy through that lens. I actually heard this secondhand from my grandpa. I don't know why my great-grandma never told me its eyes and the fact that it wore a long, flowing white robe that was out of place for the time period and location. She described its expression as curious and a bit confused, but not exactly malicious, though it obviously scared the crap out of them nonetheless. The girls screamed and cried until their father heard them and came running back to the car, but by the time he got there, the thing had wandered off out of sight. They never saw it again. My great-grandma was an extremely sweet, kind, but no-nonsense kind of lady. She wasn't really the superstitious type, and she would always just kind of chuckle at my over-the-top obsession with Harry Potter, so she wasn't the type to sort of make this story up. According to my grandpa, she attested to its truthfulness until her dying days, never once taking it back or denying it as some kind of childhood prank on their father. Does anyone have any idea what she and her sisters might have seen? My initial thought was Bigfoot, but the white robe thing kind of threw me off. I've never heard of a Bigfoot account where the creature was wearing clothes. I enjoy mountain biking, spend a lot of time outdoors, and have witnessed a number of unusual events while out biking. This one time, though, I was on a new trail with my closest friend, whom I trust a lot. It's not a very challenging trail, it's maybe around 3:30 p.m. The trail is filled with rocks, tree roots, uphill and downhill sections, and so on. It's not the easiest hike on foot. Anyway, we had just come off this downhill section. My best friend and I stopped to take a sip of water and use our trail map to figure out where we want to go next. The trail was empty, no one was out there. I had just looked ahead of me and saw no one. And then I turned to my friend and see him staring ahead of us. I glanced to see what he is looking at, and there is a frail, older man with a hiking stick. He has a canvas hat on and clothes that are too warm to wear on a 75-degree day. He came out of nowhere. Considering his age and the difficulty of the trail on foot, he had no water or other belongings with him. He seemed very out of place. But I had just looked ahead of us, maybe 30 seconds prior. And then he was just 10 feet in front of us when I saw my friend staring at him. He is walking towards us, staring at us. I get a very uneasy feeling as he's coming close. Now, granted, I didn't sense that he was intending to harm us in any way. But something just wasn't right. As he was passing in between us on our two bikes, he said, "It's a nice day, isn't it?" He continues to walk. We say yes, it's beautiful out. My friend looks at me, and I can tell he feels the same way I do. We have both biked with each other for years and have met our fair share of weird people and people strung out on drugs on the trails. Anyway, my friend says, "Did you see that guy?" I said, "Yeah, I saw that guy." We glanced back, and within a mere 10 seconds, he had vanished from our sight. Behind us was a recently descended uphill section. The terrain was treacherous, teeming with rocks and roots. My friend snaps back at me and says, "He's gone." What the hell? We proceed to turn around and bike back up the hill, around the corner, and down another section, as the trail does not deviate from this set path. The old man has vanished from sight. There is just no explainable reason, at the pace at which this guy was walking, that we did not catch up to him on bikes that traverse this terrain with ease. It still creeps me out to this day. My friend and I still discuss it, referring to it as the ghost on the trail. I have never been back on that trail. I'm still biking around that area. I was never a believer in spirits, ghosts, or whatever until something happened to me and my best friend in 2005 or 2006. We have recently spoken to each other to make sure it really happened, and it did. We were both so terrified, we didn't speak of it again, and we drifted away after high school. We both saw a spirit or something while driving down an old road between two towns where we both live. It was maybe around 8 to 9 p.m. A woman who was white, older, and had blonde or gray hair was walking along the right lane with a far-off stare on her face. It seemed to come out of nowhere, and I remember swerving to not hit her. I would have hit her, and so I slammed on the brakes. We turned around, ready to get out, and the woman was gone. I looked in the rear view and didn't see anything. I remember being weirdly calm but shocked, and both of us crying. It felt like this jolt of energy went through my body, with my friend saying the same. Afterwards, we talked about it and got online to search for whatever we could. There were some haunted Indiana sites, and I remember one particular story that mentioned almost the exact thing happening to someone. Years later, around 2009 to 2010, I shared the story with some friends at a party when one guy spoke up, flabbergasted, and mentioned the same thing happened to him when he had his permit and was learning to drive with his father down this road. I was so terrified but also relieved to know I'm not crazy. I don't tell anyone about this occurrence anymore due to some girls telling people I was probably going crazy. It happened, and I just wanted to share because it has been eating me up inside for years. It is truly terrifying, and I want to believe that others are truthful and not making up stories, but I guess I have trouble trusting due to my mistakenly telling someone who spread a crazy rumor about me years ago. Me and my two buddies are driving back from Colorado in the middle of the night when we see a blue truck pulled over on the side of the interstate. It's pitch black, nothing for miles, and there's a girl standing out in the road. The girl comes up and starts explaining that she ran out of gas. Now maybe I'm a bastard for thinking this, but when people start to interject God into what should be normal conversations, my bullshit meter starts going off. Every sentence contains some reference, and she must have blessed us 15 times. Then we realized she's standing there holding a big gas tank. Now, I'm sure some people have gas tanks in their trucks, but I've never seen anyone drive around with one, so it came across to me like she had done this before, and the gas tank was like a prop. However, the last thing that really made it creepy was that, as the conversation was wrapping up, I noticed a flash of light in the truck. When I asked her who it was, she said it was her boyfriend. There was no mention of the boyfriend before, and who sends their girl to stand in the middle of the interstate at night. So we're a bit weirded out, but we end up taking the gas tank and filling it up, and we start looking for a cop to tell him where they broke down and have him deliver the gas. Wouldn't you know it? When you want to find one, there are no cops in sight. So, we end up driving back over there, but we pass them a bit. The girl began to run towards us, but we didn't want to take the risk of being jumped. Therefore, I opened the passenger door, set the gas on the side of the interstate, and we drove away, never to be seen again. On April 26, 2014, my best friend, 18, and I, 19, were driving back to his house from Bible study at church. It was between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. About a mile and a half or so after turning onto a long country road that led to the small township he lived in, we saw a fire on the left side of the road and in a ditch. We turned around to get a better look at what was burning. Because I was in the passenger seat, I was able to look down into the ditch and see nothing burning? There was definitely a larger amount of fire than I could see through to the ground, but nothing was on fire. The ground itself appeared to be porous and folded inward. My best friend had to pull my shoulder to get my attention because I couldn't stop staring at it. A large amount of smoke started to pour out. He began driving again, but we eventually had to turn around to get back to his house at the other end of the road. When we reached the end of the road where we began, I dialed 911 to let them know that there was what appeared to be a gas leak that had caught fire in this ditch. We drove past the fire again, but it had died down a bit. However, now there are smaller little tufts of flame on the ground. One after another, they led away from the ditch. While I was turned around, looking back over my shoulder, my friend slammed onto his brakes, and I heard him say "Voo" or "Oh." Walking out horizontally into the road from the trees on the same side of the road that the fire was on was something that does not fit any description of anything I have heard from stories before. My brain needs me to itemize its descriptions as I remember noticing them. Black, big as a sedan, on 4 legs, the animal has shaggy black fur from its shoulder to its head and is emaciated from its midsection to its tail. Literally black skin stretched around bones. The head resembles that of a dog, with its eyes oriented forward and not reflecting any light. Large, round, black, and empty. Completely devoid of light. The eyeballs blinked, pressing inward as the lids closed. This thing was between 5 and 10 yards away, so I got a very good look at it through the high beams. It did not turn to look at the car, its head was raised slightly, as if it were looking into the car to look directly at us. I was not particularly afraid or fearful. However, when it looked directly at me, I felt intense feelings of dread and hopelessness being projected at me. My friend floored his old Ford Taurus and whipped it around the back end of the thing, then drove 65 miles per hour in a 35 all the way back to his house. As we were driving, I asked him, "What was that?" With tears down his face, he sobbed, "I don't know, I want to go home. I just want to go home." We ran into his house and locked all the doors and windows. When we were finally able to calm down, we did not talk to each other much for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, I would try to relay the event to my family, beginning with "I saw something the other night," and I couldn't stop telling them everything while choking back sobs. I did not want to tell them, but they knew I was not okay. The intense feelings the thing put on me were beginning to take their toll. Almost a decade later, I still haven't read a single story or alleged sighting of anything that matches what I saw. Since then, I've become familiar with regional cryptids and the lore associated with them. It wasn't an apparition of some kind because it blinked. I've not read any accounts of apparitions blinking, only closing or opening their eyes for some desired effect. This thing definitely existed physically. There is nothing in my state, India, that even comes close to fitting this description. Maybe our Black Panther or Porter Road hounds, but those happened many decades ago and quite a few hours away. I was driving home from my ex's house, who lived about 45 to 50 minutes from mine. I've made the long drive many times without anything noteworthy happening. One night in October, around 10 o'clock at night, I was driving home from my ex's place. I vividly recall pulling onto the street outside the apartment complex. After that, I don't recall anything else until I'm sitting in my driveway with my car still on. The time was around 11:50. Now I know people sort of mentally check out while driving long stretches, but even when I have, I can at least remember, oh yeah, I saw that white car with the busted tail light, or there were people outside that McDonald's when I passed. You know what I mean? Even though driving doesn't require your full attention, you're still aware of your surroundings. Well, on this night, I don't remember anything. Not one car broken down on the side of the road, not one yellow light I had passed through before it turned red, nothing. And to make things weirder, it took me an extra hour to get home. I left around 10, and it took me until almost 12. It's never taken me longer than an hour to get home on this route, even during rush hour. Last but not least, I always texted my ex as soon as I arrived home. When I returned home and glanced down at my phone, I found a text from my ex from 30 minutes earlier, asking, "Did you make it home safely yet?" So, I'm just wondering if any of you have experienced time loss. I have no idea what happened to me, but I'd love to hear if anyone else has had a similar experience. I had traveled about 5 hours to attend a family event with lots of people I hadn't seen for 20 plus years. I had my 5-year-old son with me, but my husband had to stay home because of work. Crazy drunk/stoned hippie aunt came up and said, "I see an owl on your shoulder, protecting you. Okay, love. See you again in another 20 years. Lay off the bong." Driving home, it's about 2 a.m., in the middle of nowhere, still probably 2 hours from home. Kids asleep in the back, and I start to have little danger naps. So I pull over at a rest stop, thinking I'll jump out, have a quick cigarette, and get back to it. I get out of the car, and just standing there, a meter from my door, is a big white barn owl. What the duck? I smoke while this thing just stares at me, not even blinking. Amazing. I get back in the car and decide to have a quick sleep before I start driving again. Okay. Better safe than sorry. Maybe the owl is trying to tell me something. Maybe it's 2 a.m., and I'm delirious. About a half hour later, I wake up to this terrible banging, scratching noise. I open my eyes, and this owl is on the bonnet of my car, right in front of me, and it's jumping up and down, flapping its wings, and banging into the bonnet and the windscreen. Okay. What the duck, mate? I go to get out of the car to shove it away, and when I look out my window, there's a man. Right there, staring at me through the window. He was smoking a cigarette. I still don't understand how it happened so quickly, but I just locked the doors, started the car, and started to back out of my parking spot. The man jumped at the car, trying to open the door and punching at the window. I just drove out of there as fast as I could and sped down the highway until the adrenaline wore off. Then I pulled up, had a bit of a cry, and realized I could call the police. Nothing ever happened, they never found the man, and I think they thought I was a bit insane anyway. It was as if there was really a strange man in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. I was probably just dreaming. Overtired. Imagining things. I'll forever be grateful to that big white barn owl, though. I absolutely want to make it clear that this is true. My wife and I both witnessed this and will never forget what we saw last night. I am a 43-year-old man. A former Marine with a lot of time at sea and a former railroader. So I have been to a lot of places that are just hard to get to for most people. I have never seen anything like what we saw last night, and it happened on Highway 50 in between Penrose and Pueblo, Colorado. My wife was working a closing shift in Canyon City last night. I left Pueblo and made the drive west as usual. After she clocked out, we went to pick up our son from his job, only to find he wasn't working last night. On the drive back from Canyon, you pass Penrose, and then there is a place I have always called the Big Hole. The Big Hole is actually called Pierce Gulch. There is a significant drop in elevation, and then you immediately climb back out, hence my nickname. As we approached Big Hole at about 12:40 a.m., traveling from north to south, we crossed all 4 lanes, and median, of Highway 50 at an incredible rate of speed. We were the only vehicle out there at this time of night, and we nearly hit it. It was roughly 3 feet tall and had long brown hair everywhere. And again. This thing was hauling ass. Faster than any animal I had ever seen or heard of. My wife was driving and had our son on speakerphone. She startled and looked at me as she asked, "What the duck was that?" By this time, we were at the bottom of the gulch and headed back up the hill. We told our son what we saw, and she got off the call. We discussed it for a second and decided to go back and see if maybe it had gotten caught in the barbed wire fence or something. Maybe there was some trace of this thing. We were both amazed by how fast it was moving. By 1245, we had traveled back to the west side of the gulch and turned around. There wasn't any traffic, so my wife just slowly rolled down the shoulder of the highway, and I had my window down and was shining a flashlight that I had in the car out into the field. There isn't much out there except cacti and stuff. As we came up with the approximate area where we saw this thing, I told my wife, "Hey, look, do you see those eyes?" She said yes and stopped the car. 10 yards or so on the other side of the fence was a pair of very bright, very blue eyes. Not far off the ground. I was thinking we were probably looking at a coyote or something. It was looking directly back at us. What happened next is something I will never forget as long as I live. Whatever those eyes belonged to, ducking stood up. Like a man. Like a 6.5 to 7 foot man. They were still looking at us. Whatever it was that flew across the road at like Mach 2, this was it. This was the most hairy thing we saw. There was a moment of disbelief and shock. And then, as it registered that we had found the thing, and it wasn't just some animal, the fear kicked in. I told my wife, "Go go go go. Ducking go." It seemed like slow motion. She floored the gas, and the thing watched us leave. We already knew that this thing was incredibly fast. So she drove as fast as she could up and out of the gulch, and I was looking out the back window and checking mirrors. My wife was afraid it might be following us. It wasn't, and I didn't want to make things worse by admitting that I was worried too. We drove very fast for several minutes. We talked, but it was like we were each talking to ourselves. Like, "Oh my ducking God, what the hell was that? And was it waiting for us?" Soon, the lights from Pueblo West were ahead, and we were back in civilization. Once we got into the city, we finally started to relax a little. We talked until we got home, and then checked the car for anything. We couldn't really go to sleep for hours. My wife got online and was searching for anything that matched the creature we saw. She found some stories, paranormal in nature, of other people witnessing a creature that sounded exactly like the one we had seen. She has to work the same shift tonight. So on our way out to Canyon City, we are going to stop and go out into the field where we saw the thing and see if there is any evidence. Footprints or hair. Something. I'm a door dasher in an area with a lot of trees and few street lights. One night, my mother and I were driving down a heavily wooded road with no lights. The darkness was suffocating, and I felt its presence. It was enough that it gave me a migraine and made me sick. Our brights penetrated enough of the darkness for us to see ahead, and while I was looking around for incoming cars, I saw this 8-foot-tall black stick figure just standing in the road. It then noticed I was looking at it and quickly yet jerkily walked into the trees. I kept it to myself until a few nights ago, when I told my mother. We were outside on our porch at about 12 o'clock to 2 a.m. on a rainy night, and while I was telling her about what I saw, something started whistling at me. As a kid, maybe preteens, I was headed up north on a family vacation. My brother, sister, and I were in the back of a truck with a covered topper. We had plenty of blankets, pillows, books, toys, and even a boombox to keep us occupied, plus a window into the cab that we could open if we needed anything. At some point, early in the morning, while my siblings were asleep, I found myself just staring out at the stars against the black sky. That's when I saw something no one would ever believe. Not until years later, anyway. A flash of bright orange lights lit up and zoomed across the night sky, intertwining and weaving about as they flew across my view out of the side window, vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. I had seen my first UFO. I was convinced. I was also the only one to see it. My mom said I was probably asleep and dreamed the whole thing, but I know I was awake. I know what I saw. I knew life existed outside of our planet, and I knew they were here. Years later, I was riding in the family SUV as we headed home from visiting family. Mom was driving and my siblings were once again sleeping when suddenly it happened again. The same orange lights were flying across the night sky, but this time, instead of a mix of wonder, excitement, and fear, I burst out laughing. My mom had just rolled her window down and flicked her cigarette out the window. The possible Men in Black encounter occurred before the lost time incident. I even have the exact date, as it was on a day when tragedy struck, February 1, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. My parents were driving to visit me in Dallas, Texas, this time. My mom did not remember the name of the town, but they stopped to get gas or food at a small gas station. My mom does remember that she and my dad were hungry and bought a lot of junk food, chips, soda, hot dogs, Twinkies, etc. They did not buy gas. When they went to the counter to pay, my mom told me that she saw two men in black suits with sunglasses behind the counter. She thought it was very odd considering the place was out in the country in a rural area, but she didn't judge. The thing that was more odd was that the two men seemed unsure of how to operate the cash register. The two men seemed quite confused about how to ring up items. My dad noticed that they did not scan anything, nor did they know the prices of any of the items that my parents were buying. They didn't pick up or look at any of the items. They would look at the cash register, then at each other, and then back at the items. This happened a couple of times. My mom started to get a bit agitated because she was hungry and ready to keep going. She asked them how much everything was. The men looked at each other and said, $5? According to my parents, they had at least $10 or more worth of items. The men seemed to be negotiating, according to my dad. He thought it was funny, but my mom said, fine, and threw down a $5 bill. They left and kept going on their way. When they got to a larger town, they were able to get a good radio signal and heard about the Columbia shuttle exploding upon re-entry. Once they got to my house, we talked about it. My dad said that it seemed like these two men were out of place. He felt that these two men definitely did not belong in that gas station. He also agreed with my mom that they moved almost robot-like. Very stiff and rigid were his exact words. I have no idea if Men in Black or the Columbia shuttle disaster were connected, but it was indeed strange. I clock in for work at 5:30 a.m., which means I'm on the freeway by 5 a.m. I live in Northern California, so it's pretty dark, and since most people work from home, it's also lonely at this hour. For the past week, I've seen the shadow of a man by the base of a bridge I pass every day. I see him from the corner of my eye, but when I turn to focus, no one is there. I don't scare easily, and there are a lot of homeless people on the freeway, so I thought nothing of it. Right after the bridge is a ramp to catch another freeway, and these are really close. One day I'm running late to work, and I'm approaching the ramp. Since I'm running late, I'm going at a good 75/80ths of a mile per hour. Out of nowhere, I see a shadow moving, and it starts to run across the freeway ramp. I panic and hit the brakes, because as soon as my headlights illuminate the guy, I think it's a homeless man. I don't hit the brakes fast enough, and the car goes straight through the guy's legs. He turned to me and disappeared into the darkness. There was no sound of the car hitting anything, and for a while I thought, maybe my brain imagined it. The sensors on my car light up every time I enter that ramp, even before this incident. This happens even when there is absolutely nothing around. So this happened in Melbourne, Florida, a while back. School had just ended, and I missed my bus to get home. I called my dad and asked him to pick me up, because I didn't have a car at the time, and he said he would, but since he was at work, it'd take a few hours. I was upset but took it as an opportunity to get my homework done and sat down at a bench facing the fence outside the school. Across the street there was some sort of clinic, and in front of it there was this pale, four-legged thing sprinting full speed like a dog except bigger. I remember that it had really big hind legs. This part sounds really fake, but I swear to God, a car of some sort went by, and as it passed in front, the creature vanished. I think most likely it went and hid somewhere, or maybe even latched onto the car. The people who I've told this to have said it probably disappeared, teleported, or something, but I honestly don't believe that. I don't know why, but that just doesn't feel like what happened. I never saw anything like this again, and I'm honestly just searching for an explanation, so anything you all can provide would be gratefully accepted. I have been wanting to share this for a while, but because of neurodivergence, I have issues with articulating things that are not logical. I fail at being emotional and illogical. So please be kind while I try my best. Last October, my boyfriend took me to a lookout point in the Sierra Mountains. On the Northern California side. We travel to lots of places. Shasta and this lookout point are our favorite places to get away from noise, air pollution, and people pollution. A lot of tourists stop through for the sunsets and hiking, and Chinese college students, NASA hopefuls, often fly their drones. No one, but fiancé and me, stays past sunset. We love being there at night when you can smell the sweet, earthy breeze. He will bust out our camping grill and start cheffing while we drink and let the dogs roam about. We have had many paranormal experiences at this location. Small things, mostly. Nothing like this day, however. I always saw Bigfoot, giants, Loch Ness, and other cryptid myths as being really stupid. I wholeheartedly believed in aliens, as I had a lot of childhood encounters with them, as had my father. In early October 2022, I wanted to see the full moon but didn't expect to be proposed to during sunset. I didn't expect us to be the only visitors there that day, either. That was a tad unusual. I got out of the car to help signal my fiancée to park when I impatiently looked towards the path that leads to the lookout point. I wanted to see the sunset, and we made it a little later than I had liked. Fiancée was getting frustrated, assuming I had a squirrel moment, and I got distracted. I was really trying to make sense of what the hell I was seeing. There are two paths. When you drive in, there is a small circular parking lot with two outhouses that are at the foot of the main path that branches into two paths. The right path is a steep incline that leads high to the lookout point, which is concreted with a stone ledge so that you won't drop 15 to 20 feet into clusters of stones. The left path follows a decline down the mountain, where there are a couple of picnic tables that are surrounded by trees and many large stones to climb down even further. You can see for miles. I saw what looked to be an abnormally huge person standing in front of the lookout point. Their back to me. Two things struck me. The red, gold, or orange hair. He had a massive head of flame-colored hair. The second thing was where he was standing. Outside the stone ledge of the lookout point. Which wasn't very possible for me. I saw his shoulders and the back of his head well above the 15-foot mark, so I couldn't understand what I was seeing. I was seriously looking at a red-haired giant, just casually watching the sunset. Even giants enjoy simple pleasures. Stephen was yelling at me, so I remember thinking, maybe it's a tree, and the sunset is hitting the autumn leaves just right to make it dramatic. We grab our things and start trekking towards the lookout point. I was telling him what had me distracted, but as we started the path, I noticed the lack of a tree. Or a giant. You'd think a giant walking around would produce sound. I felt silly, so I let it go as we watched the sunset. My boyfriend proposed to me there, and I said yes. I forgot about it when I glimpsed that bright, flamey hair. We grabbed our machetes and headed back to the dogs. Stephen saw what I did, but where this person was not an easy place to get to. If Stephen and I wanted to get there by foot, it would take us maybe a half hour of climbing down rocks and walking across very rocky terrain, and even then we could not get up that mountain. No way, unless by airlift. I think we watched it go inside of an arched stone doorway that's disguised as part of the mountain. How the hell did he get up there? You couldn't climb that. It was jagged and went straight up. Stephen thinks it was Bigfoot, but I had to remind him that Bigfoot is covered in fur. This was a giant man with long flame hair. That freak was a giant. We stuck around for a couple hours, and then we went home. I made it back by 1 a.m., straight to bed. This part is extra hard to articulate. I wish I could extract memories into video so that I could show this to those who may teach me how it's possible for light to act this way. There are more than a few contradictions, including slow and fast. When you turn on a light, it just lights up instantly. This was like a spreading, crawling, or painting of light. I can't describe it any better. It was quick but slow enough for me to watch the light spread. When it hit the ceiling crease, it seemed to spread slower down a third of the wall before it instantly detracted. So unnatural. As far as I know, light doesn't work like how I witnessed it that night. I was laying awake, reliving the evening, mostly the proposal. I was cheesing, looking up at the ceiling, listening to the frequencies we leave on the computer as we sleep. My side of the bed is against the wall, so the crease of the ceiling was where my gaze was when the room just seemed to fill with white light. I remembered how it spread over that crease, and it freaked me out because as soon as it painted in, it detracted just as quickly. I sat up and looked around. In front of my computer, which is against the wall in the very middle of my room, I saw an electric or energy ball or something right smack dab in front of it. Just hovering. Steven lifted his eye mask up and asked me what I was doing, but that orb thing gave the room another flash of white light and disappeared. "I bet you saw that one, huh?" was my response, and he did. He didn't see the orb. I told him about the orb and that there was a flash before that. He thinks he saw the first flash but assumed it was the YouTube frequency video I had on. I joke now and then, saying I think the orb wanted to watch YouTube, but I think it was just in the middle to spread its light evenly. The light was bright, but it didn't seem to hurt our eyes. So that is also confusing. I wish to mention that this experience set me on a path of obsession with starseeds, angels, synchronicities, and other things I never would have entertained. I was a science geek and atheist who is now questioning everything. My life has been extra shittier since. As my fiancée is currently in prison until 2025. I never had family, Dad couldn't stand my autism, even down past the shoulders, and dark clothes that were more like shrouds. The clothes looked like they were a pile of clothes or blankets somehow, it's really hard to explain it. Also, the dog was kind of pulling or being restrained by what I assumed was a leash, though I didn't see a leash or the lady's hand. But the lady didn't move at all. Not an arm, not a shoulder, nothing. Totally still. In that first flash of a second, I'm thinking of a mentally ill person or someone on drugs, but this is the part I cannot get over, and my 15-year-old daughter saw it too. It had no face. It was a complete white void that was 100% not a mask, a covering, or anything else. It was actually faceless. There was no dimension, shadow, texture, definition, or anything else. It was a blank, pure white space that was just empty. I'm absolutely certain what I saw was not a mask, hood, face paint, or some other costume or prank. I've seriously never seen anything so messed up in my life. I wanted to turn around to look again, but my other child was scared and crying from our reactions and begging me not to, so I didn't. She didn't see it like I and my older daughter did. I got home and posted on a social media unexplained phenomenon group for my state, and someone else had seen it and was unnerved by it too, but didn't see the blank face. Another person had called the police, saying the woman was sitting with her back to the road as they drove by, and the police checked the area with no findings. I'm open to finding out more about this from people who may know. I've driven on this road thousands of times in the last couple of decades and never seen or heard of it before. Once in a while, I would be driving on the freeway, and I would clearly see a person running across the freeway and then just disappear. When this started happening for me at first, I really thought it was just my imagination. But I swore I saw an actual person run on the freeway and disappear when a car hit them. I'd slow down and look back to see if there was anything, and nope. Nothing. This only happens to me once in a great while. I haven't seen anything of the sort lately. Has anyone ever experienced something similar to this? I'm going to recount a story that happened about 6 years ago, when I was living with my parents at my family home. The strangeness started as I was driving down the main back road to get back to my house, which connected my hometown to a neighboring town that some of my friends lived in. It was roughly 10 p.m., and I was following a friend back to my home. He had quite the lead on me and may have arrived at my house 5 to 6 minutes before I did. The road itself is called Tyree Springs and is a hilly, snaking back road with an incline on one side and a descent on the other. I have driven this road thousands of times, if not more, throughout my teenage years leading up to this. As I was driving, I noticed a blue light following behind me, almost like a motorcycle light. It is important to note that it was early November and possibly 50 degrees outside. Though the motorcycle isn't off the table, riding late at that temperature seems odd. At the time, I had a junky first-generation DSM with an exhaust. As I was trying to figure out what was behind me, I pushed the clutch in, hoping to hear the sound of a motorcycle or something similar. Silence, absolutely nothing but road noise. This had spooked me a little bit, so I dropped gear and sped up to about 65 miles an hour to get some distance. When I looked back, I saw that the light had been quite far behind me. I check my rear view again and see the light even closer to my bumper. I was extremely scared and proceeded to accelerate up to about 85 miles per hour, and as I was rounding the long, sweeping right-hand turn, I looked back and saw the light stop on the top of the hill. I had just come down and darted right. Not in the motion of something turning into a driveway or anything like that. The light is just accelerating to the right. To this day, I have no idea what it was, but it spooked me beyond belief. State Road, between Corunna, me, and Chesaning, me, is known for a couple weird occurrences, one of which is a ghost vehicle. It's an early 2000s Chevy Impala that, supposedly, went off the road in the snow and killed its driver when it flipped on a S-curve at the county line. I have seen it once. 3 or 4 years ago, I was driving south on the road late at night when a car went by, and the taillights just disappeared after they got probably 100 feet behind me. I couldn't see anything about the car, not even headlights shining on the road, so it's not like the taillights had just quit at that time. I wasn't sure what had happened, so I turned around fast and went back to see what had happened, and there was nothing there. Keep in mind that the road was straight in that area, and there were no driveways or roads it could have turned onto to go out of sight like that. The lights didn't dim or do anything, they just disappeared completely. Weird. Another, semi-relevant, story is about the railroad tracks at Delaney Road, northwest of Owasso, Michigan. Supposedly, this was the site of a derailment in the early 1900s, and some railroad staff died in the accident. Occasionally, you will see a light way down the tracks to the northwest if you look down there when crossing the tracks. The light appears to be a flame, probably a lantern, as it is dim. I have seen it multiple times. It stays still and doesn't move, and there are no yard lights to cause this effect in the area. There's no way for it to be car headlights either, as no roads run parallel to the tracks. There are also no signal boxes that have a pilot light that could be causing the effect, either. This just happened to me for the second time. The first time was a few months ago, and it was on the same stretch of road. Each time I had someone else in the car with me witness it, and each time it was a different person. Essentially, it's dark out, and I am the only car on a mostly flat, but some smaller, sloping hills type road. I always stare at oncoming traffic or look for lights on the telephone wires, especially when it's dead of night, because if they don't turn off their high beams, I don't either. So I purposefully watch them from the second I see them until the second they drive away, in a high beam game of chicken. The point is, I did not take my eyes off these cars for even a second. It's always over a small hill, where you'll see the headlights and the reflection off the wires, and then they'll disappear behind the small slope, usually to resurface seconds later. Except these times, they didn't. There were no side roads, and it was in a mostly flat field area, the same area both times. There was no time for this car to even turn down a side road if there was one to turn down. It's as simple as oncoming headlights being there, they got lost behind the slope, and once I reached the peak of the slope, there was absolutely no car to be found. Vanished into thin air. I am so baffled by this. I'm glad this second time my friend was with me, because I told her about it the first time and she didn't believe me. The look on her face was priceless. I've been trying to do some research on it, but sightings seem to be few and very scattered. Have you or anyone you know ever experienced this phenomenon? Did you see just the headlights or an entire vehicle? Was it on a highway or a back road? Did you see it multiple times or just once and gone? Could you see a person in the vehicle? If so, how did they look? This is such a shot in the dark, but I would love feedback. I'm so engrossed in this right now, and I'd love to hear about other experiences. About 10 years ago, I lived in a rural town that was about 4 hours west of the northern coast of New South Wales. You had to drive through a windy range to get there, and it was beautiful, like a rainforest. I used to always wonder what would be amongst all the trees driving past. I had heard briefly of ghost sightings from people around the area I lived in, but didn't think much of it until my partner at the time admitted to me why he hated driving through there. We had to if we ever wanted to go on some sort of beach holiday. He told me that he was driving back home in the evening with a friend of his after Australia Day weekend when they saw an old car parked in a rest area, and thought nothing of it, especially as it was so dark by this time. A little further up, they stopped as a woman was on the side of the road waving at them to pull over. She said the car was hers and asked hesitantly if it was okay. They dropped her off at her driveway, a few kilometers up the road. They did, and once they arrived, she told them she would flick the lights on and off when she made it up there safely, as the driveway was a small hike. I guess she didn't feel comfortable with them coming to her house. However, they watched her walk most of the way up until they couldn't see her. If I remember correctly, it had been about 15 minutes when they realized the lights weren't flicking off and on again. They were genuinely concerned for her, as she was a bit older. So they drove up, and a couple came out to see who they were. They insisted it was just them and their young child who lived there, no one else. But they hadn't been the only ones to report an older woman being dropped off at their house. The woman who lived there before them had died, but they weren't really up for the conversation. They seemed to be over it. They drove back the opposite way, and the car was gone. I remember him mentioning it to his friend, and he didn't have much to say about it. They had nothing to say, really. But he was a bit uncomfortable. A few years ago, I was driving home around midnight from getting cigarettes at a corner store right down the road from my home. There'd been a massive blizzard, massive for the state I live in, anyway, a few nights before. The road I live on is still notoriously dangerous because there are always idiots from the surrounding trailer parks walking up and down the street late at night, in dark clothing, with nothing reflective or anything illuminating them, which makes them impossible to see in the dark, along with people driving way too fast and recklessly. There've been numerous accidents and deaths as a result of these fools, and the speed limit on the road has been lowered from 40 to 30 as a result. It changed nothing, however, because people still drive like jackasses, flying up and down the street, and people walking still get hit or cause accidents. Add in the road being completely iced over, and you've got a recipe for disaster. I have a 4x4 SUV, so it's not a huge deal for me when the roads are icy, but I'm still very cautious in bad weather, unlike most people around here who, for whatever reason, lose their SHT if it snows, which is why every year there's a blizzard. It looks like duckin' Armageddon around here, with wrecked and flipped cars around every turn. So, as I said, I was driving home, and it had begun to flurry a bit, so I got my chin on the steering wheel, trying to stay on the completely snow-covered road, and right as I passed the trailer park, there was an area where it's nothing but fields and trees for about a 1/4 mile before you get to my neighborhood. As I'm driving down this little dimly lit area, out of nowhere comes this little older model gray hatchback speeding past me in the other direction, and in my side view, I see this car go off the road, hit an embankment, and ramp a good 10 feet in the air into the trees and brush, rotating over where it's inevitably going to land upside down on its roof. I saw it happen, clear as day, everything except the landing was because the brush and trees were blocking my view. It was like something out of a game. So, I pull into the next driveway I see, get out, and hurry over to see if there's anything I can do to help this person, who I am sure is either dead or fatally injured. I walk up, and as I'm walking, I call 911 and explain to the dispatcher what I saw. They get my name and information as I'm looking for the car, however, I can't find anything. I hear no sounds of the wheels spinning, no screaming, nothing, and I can't see any trace of the car or driver, nor any tracks leading to the crash or signs there'd been a wreck at all. The dispatcher tells me there's an officer in the area who will be there shortly and asks if I care to wait for him to arrive. I wait, and he shows up 5 to 10 minutes later. I walk him over to the area, and we both thoroughly search, finding nothing. The officer is slightly annoyed, and I can tell he thinks I'm crazy. An ambulance arrives, and the officer and I, along with the 2 EMTs, continue to search for the next 10 minutes through an area no larger than a couple big backyards, but don't find anything. The whole time, I had to repeat to all 4 that I'm certain of what I saw. We eventually give up, I'm questioning my own sanity, and the officer informs me that he'll have someone check the area again when the sun comes up, just in case somehow we all overlooked it. He takes my information, and I go home. The whole night it's eating at me, imagining someone trapped upside down in the snow, badly injured, praying for help, maybe even hearing us search, but never being rescued. I barely sleep at all as a result. I'd hoped I'd hear back from the officer, but I never did. However, and here's where shit gets really weird, a week or so later, I drive by the same spot, and there's a white cross hung on a tree, the exact spot where I saw the crash take place. The date on the cross is from the day after I witnessed the accident. Later, when I returned home, I looked up the name on the cross in the obituaries, and sure enough, a teenage girl had left a friend's house in her gray 1995 Honda hatchback. When she lost control on the ice, she went off the road, hit a small embankment, and spiraled through the trees, landing upside down and killing her instantly. She was less than 300 yards from the trailer she lived in with her mom. The accident took place the very next night, around the same time I thought I had witnessed it. Somehow, I was shown the accident before it had even taken place. I still have trouble understanding how that's at all possible. The thought of it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I am currently experiencing paranormal events. It only happens in my car when I am driving at night. The first few times that I noticed it, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, the play of the car lights at night, reflections, and my imagination. But last night, I saw her in the rearview mirror, sitting quietly staring at me. When I turned around and looked into the backseat, there was nothing. But when I turn around and look in the rear view, there she is. This is a girl with dark brown hair and dark eyes. She is wearing a white t-shirt that looks dirty. She almost looks wet, but not like dripping wet. It feels sweaty and dirty. The look on her face was a sad one. It broke my heart to see her face. I kept my eyes on the road while keeping an eye on the rear view mirror. Her facial expression never changed. She just looked so sad and looked right into my eyes as I peered into the rear view mirror. I finally got the nerve to speak, and I said, "I see you there. You are welcome to ride with me, but you cannot scare me, okay?" She nodded her head and looked out the back passenger window. Once I came up on my street, I looked in the rear view, and she was gone. I kept looking behind me as I entered the house. I don't think she followed me home, but I picked my daughter up from work at 9 p.m. again tomorrow night, and I'm very curious if I will see her again and what she wants. So I live in a small town in Minnesota, about in the middle of the state, and me and my friend were riding electric bikes on the roads around my house. It was about 9-ish in the summer, so it was dark but not fully dark yet. The bikes had flashlights on them, so we could see somewhat clearly what was in front of us, mainly the road, but not far into the road. So about 40 feet in front of us, we see a lanky, black figure, blacker than the sky at the time. As we see it, we both quickly turn around the bikes and start booking it back home, and it starts running after us on the bikes and was gaining on us at one point as we were going 20 miles per hour. When it was running, its arms were flopping around above its head, and it was also running almost straight up. After about 120 to 150 feet of chasing us, it gave up, and we made it back. This happened in 2019. I was driving home from work at about 11:30 p.m. I had just turned onto my road and was driving down it when I saw something moving in the ditch on the side of the road. It was dark, but there were street lights, so I could see well enough to tell that it was a large dog. It looked like a German Shepherd or some other large breed of dog. I slowed down and pulled up next to it in my car. As I did this, it stood up and started walking towards me. It came right up to the passenger side door and looked inside at me. At first, I thought that maybe it had been hit by a car because it seemed dazed or confused somehow. But then, as I looked at it more closely, I realized that this wasn't a normal dog. It was tall and muscular, with long legs and a very large head with big ears, like a German Shepherd. The fur was also strange looking, not really like fur but more like hair, longer than what you would see on most dogs. Its eyes were yellowish orange in color, and they seemed to glow slightly in the light from my headlights, but not as bright as if they were reflecting light. I sat there for several seconds, staring at this thing while trying to figure out what exactly it was. Then suddenly, without any warning whatsoever, it opened its mouth wide and let out an incredibly loud scream. This scared me so much that I quickly put my car in reverse and backed away from it while keeping my eyes on it through my rearview mirror. Once I got back far enough so that the thing couldn't reach me through my open window, I sped off down the road as fast as I could go. As soon as I got home, I went straight inside, where my wife asked me why I was so late getting home. I told her that I had just seen something strange and asked her if she believed in werewolves or dogmen. She thought I was joking at first, but when she realized that I was serious, she said that it must have been a werewolf or dogman. I didn't sleep much that night, as this experience really shook me up. The next day, I drove back down the road to see if there were any signs of blood or anything else in the ditch where this thing had been. But there wasn't anything unusual to be seen anywhere. Several days later, while driving home from work, this time earlier in the evening, I saw the same thing again. It was standing in the same spot along the side of the road where it had been before. This time, however, it ran off into some nearby trees and bushes when it noticed my car coming towards it. Once again, there wasn't any sign of blood or anything else to indicate that this thing may have been hit by a car recently. But then again, maybe it's just out for a walk at night and gets hit by cars all the time? Who knows? I've never seen this thing since then, thankfully. But what exactly was it? Was it a werewolf or a dogman? Or perhaps something entirely different? Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't normal. My dad is from Louisiana, so we used to spend a few weeks in the summer there growing up. One night, my cousin, brother, and I were fishing for catfish in the middle of nowhere. We catch a few, load them up, and head home. It is about 1 or 2 a.m. as we were driving out of the woods in the middle of nowhere. There was a group of about 30 to 40 people staggering around the road. These people looked really pale, and their clothes were all beat up and worn out. We stopped the car to watch them and to see if they would pass, but they just kept staggering everywhere aimlessly. So we started to move the car slowly in between them, but right as we got in the middle, they started to come at our car and try to get in it, and we floored it and got out of there. It was one of the weirdest things I have ever seen in my life. It's likely a bizarre cult or something similar. I was driving with my girlfriend through Wisconsin on the way back home. It was really late, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I stopped at a gas station to fill up. My GPS ended up putting me on a small highway instead of the expressway right away after leaving there, but I didn't want to complicate things more, so I just followed it. My girlfriend was sleeping, so I had the radio off and drove in silence on this really dark, creepy highway. There were deer crossing signs, so I was driving extra cautious because a family friend had recently hit a deer in their truck, which did quite a number on it and also caused her to break her arm from the impact. I saw there was a pretty sharp curve coming up, so I slowed down to make it carefully, and as I'm turning, I see a figure exiting the darkness of the woods. It's a large mountain lion, with blood stained all over the front of its face. Scared the duck out of me. I pulled up just after the turn and tried to wake my girlfriend up. I could see its large shadow make its way across the road in my rearview mirror, but by the time my girlfriend woke up, it was gone. She had lived in Wisconsin most of her life and immediately dismissed my claims that it was a mountain lion because they are not really from that area. I told her I knew what I saw, but she insisted that I was seeing things. I acted like she was probably right and continued the trip back, but I know what I saw. 18 years ago, I and 3 friends were driving to a party. We had not been drinking prior to this, we had not taken any drugs. It's around 11 or 12 at night, and we pull up to a stop sign. My friend, who was driving, didn't know which way to turn, so he and another friend up front were trying to figure out which way to go. We're stopped there for about 15 seconds, and I look to the right and see what looks like a dog in the road. It's probably about 15 yards away from us. I stink at measuring distance, but it's basically close enough to see the shape clearly but not close enough to be able to make out any details. He was on all fours at this point. I then focus my attention on my friends in the front, but out of my peripheral vision, I see the creature stand up. At this point, my full attention is now on this creature. I scream, "What the F is that?" And everyone turns to look at it. It was about 3.5 feet tall, and its knees were bent inward. It started walking towards us and got under a streetlight, but there were 0 features. No eyes, no mouth. Anything. This is a solid black figure. We book it out of there, and I look back to see the thing trying to chase us, but with its deformed legs, it wasn't able to run well. It's bothered me all these years to wonder what it was, and we didn't really talk much about it directly after that. We all lost contact, but a few years ago, I started thinking about that incident and started second-guessing what happened. I messaged the friend that was driving and said, "Hey, remember that one night, when me, you, so-and-so got lost looking for that party?" And he immediately responded, and we saw that thing on the road that tried to chase us. Has anyone seen anything like this before? The inwardly bent knees are what really messed me up. I live in the USA, in East Tennessee, if that can help narrow down what this creature may have been. This experience happened at approximately 1:20 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, 2018. I live in SW Washington State and rented a vacation home in Lincoln City, Oregon, to accommodate mine and my sister's family, who were flying in from Hawaii for the Thanksgiving holiday. We had all arrived at the rental around 3 p.m. About 7:30 p.m., my son started yelling for me. He said my 1-year-old grandson had gotten into my case with my blood pressure medications, and sure enough, one of my pills was missing. We panicked and called poison control, who told us to call 911 as soon as possible. They sent an ambulance and took my grandson to a small hospital in the area. The staff there did what they could but told us they were not equipped for the situation and my grandson needed to be transported to Randall's Children's Hospital in Portland, Oregon. So, on Thanksgiving Eve, a pediatric ambulance was sent from Randall's to Lincoln City, about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive due to holiday traffic. It took around midnight to pick up my grandson. My son's wife was on the road in an ambulance with my grandson back to Randall's. Me and my son went back to the beach house to get diapers and clothes and started the drive to Randall's at about 12:30 a.m. Okay, so here's where we encountered something that I and my son will never forget for as long as we live. We had been on the road for about an hour and had just passed the Spirit Mountain Casino on Highway 18 and were in the area that was all hay farmland in between Bellevue and McMinnville. The road has only 2 lanes and is definitely a long, deserted road, especially at that hour of night. The ride had been very emotional, as I felt extremely guilty for having packed my medications in a side pocket of a tote bag where my grandson was able to access them. I was terrified for him and crying. My son was also upset, and although he was trying to hide it, I knew he blamed me. Anyway, here is the crazy part. While we were driving, I noticed my son slightly drifting on the road. He was falling asleep. Twice, I asked him if he was okay to drive and to be careful. So being that, I was very concerned that he might fall asleep. I was very aware and was up watching him and the road, making sure he would not fall asleep. As we were driving down this road, going about 55 miles per hour, in the distance, we both saw what at first we thought was a deer running in our lane of the road, coming straight at us, but within a couple seconds, we realized it was not a deer but a golden-colored horse. It must have been about 250 to 300 feet away at that point. It got closer fast, as, like I said, we were traveling at about 55 miles per hour. As it got about 150 feet away, it leapt upwards and morphed instantly into a giant owl right before our eyes. The wingspan stretched past our lane on the road. My son and I estimate it to be between 12 and 15 feet. This thing was enormous. As soon as we saw that, my son yelled out, "What?" and swerved the car to the left to avoid it, and just as he did this, the owl immediately landed about 50 feet ahead of us to our right, in that little area outside the white line, like the bike path area. The owl kind of tucked its head and wings into its chest as if it were scared or trying to hide. As we drove past it, I got a good look at it out my window, and with its head and wings tucked in, it still came up to about the bottom of the window of the Subaru. It seemed a little wider than the width of a beach ball. So he is about 3.5 feet tall and 20 to 24 inches all the way around the body. This thing was mind-blowingly big. As soon as this happened, it was almost as if a trance came over us. It affected both of us in the same ways. 1. We both did not speak a word the entire rest of the drive at all, until we got to the hospital. 2. We both lost all feelings of being tired, and it felt like calm alertness and awareness took over. I never even felt the fear that he would fall asleep after the encounter. 3. The memory of the experience was crystal clear, but the curiosity and wonder, or even awe, did not hit us until we drove back through the same area the next afternoon after my grandson was discharged. It's like we suddenly both said, "And what the heck was that thing we saw last night?" And it all started pouring out from both of us, the exact same thing that we saw. My son's wife was asking us questions about it, and we were blurting out the exact same answers. It was mind-blowing. To this day, we talk about it and wonder, what did we witness that night? We both agree that this seemed to be some mythical creature or shapeshifter. We both also agree that whatever it was good, meant us no harm, and may have been a guardian. Or maybe it was something that we witnessed by accident and weren't meant to see. Either way, just the fact that we both saw it. I feel extremely lucky and blessed to have seen proof with my own eyes that animal spirits, shapeshifters, or magical creatures do exist. It makes me wonder about stories of fairies, mermaids, and Pegasuses, and Nessie may just be true. This happened in El Paso, Texas. My parents were driving from California to visit me in Austin, Texas, where I used to live. I was talking to my mom on my cell phone, the flip phone type, as she entered El Paso. For those who don't know the area, let me give you a visual to better help you understand. There is a mountain when you come through El Paso. It's called Franklin Mountain. In the evenings, there is a huge, brightly illuminated star that sits on one side of the mountain. This star can be seen from the main highway that runs through El Paso, I-10. That being said, this is the highway my parents were driving on as we spoke on the cell phone. I remember asking my mom where they were in El Paso. She said they were coming around the highway and could see the bright star on the mountain. Side note, they have driven through this area many times and are familiar with the star, as am I. The strange thing was that right after my mom told me where they were, our call dropped. I tried to call her back a couple of times but figured they were in a dead area, where the signal is too weak from the towers. Remember, this was 10 years ago? I tried to call back 15 minutes later, but it went to voicemail. I waited another 15 minutes and called, but received voicemail again. The third time I called back, 45 minutes had passed since the call was dropped. This time, my stepdad answered in a weird sounding voice. I told him that our call had dropped and asked where they were. My stepdad told me he wasn't sure. He handed the phone to my mom. I asked her, where were they? She told me they were at a gas station in El Paso. She told me something that didn't really hit home with me until after they arrived at my house. She said she didn't know how they got to this gas station. I laughed at her and said she was probably too busy talking to my stepdad and didn't notice. She told me that there was hardly any traffic, and it shouldn't have taken them 45 minutes to get to where they were. According to my parents, they were only 10 minutes from where their call had been dropped by Franklin Mountain. I was the only witness. I kept trying to call them back but couldn't reach them for 45 minutes. My stepdad seemed to shake up as well. He is a very scientific, no-nonsense man who doesn't believe in anything other than science. He told my mom that the last thing he remembered was staring at the bright star on Franklin Mountain. She also agreed that was the last thing she recalled. The next thing she knew, she was pumping gas at this gas station, and my stepdad was sitting in the passenger seat, looking dazed. She said they felt as though they had just woken up, slightly lethargic and groggy. I asked her if they were the only ones at this gas station. She told me that the gas station was quite busy as it was located right off the highway. I didn't even think about time loss and figured there was a logical explanation. My mom told me they had to keep moving so they could make it to the next big town and spend the night. Nothing else happened, and they continued on their trip the next day after a night of rest. Once they arrived at my house, we spoke about it more. I realized that I had tried to call them back a few times during that 45-minute gap, and it kept going straight to voicemail. I asked my stepdad what could have happened since he was Mr. Science Rules. He said that he could not give me any explanation. Mine with Spanish moss, and it is hot, humid, and bug-infested. The whole scene was straight out of Scooby-Doo. As the sun started to go down, it began cooling off, so we started waking up. My car had no AC, and we were overheated and silent. It was rapidly getting dark when I realized there were no street lights. There were no street lights, and we hadn't passed a gas station in a very long time. We weren't encountering other drivers anymore. I asked my husband if he wanted to drive, and he said yeah. That part of SC is flat. The roads are straight, and there are fields, trees, and swamps on either side. Far ahead, I could see a light, maybe a street light of some kind. I planned on pulling over to change places. I started slowing down as we got closer. We'd been approaching it for a really long time when I saw that the light was moving. Flames. It was a car. Engulfed in flames in the middle of nowhere, burning on the side of the road with no one around. I was so bewildered by what I saw that I'd taken my foot off the gas as we approached. My future husband said, "Go." I then put my foot down. He then told me there were a couple of people standing just in the line of trees. They were hunkered down at first, but when I slowed down, they stood up. This was before cell phones. We just fled. There was no mention of anything about it on the radio or in the paper for the next few days. My boyfriend and I were driving east on I-20 from Texas back home to Georgia. At this point, we were somewhere in Mississippi, late at night. I would guess 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. at the point where we saw this person. There was no gas station or rest stop for maybe 10 to 20 miles. I was in the right lane when I looked over to see a woman dressed in all white clothes. The clothes resembled a nun outfit. The clothes were very raggedy. The woman kept her head down as I swerved around her. The only vehicle around was a tractor trailer. My description isn't spooky, but given the location and time, it's strange and gave me chills. I don't drive. Something about getting behind the wheel and controlling a giant four-wheeled machine that has the capability to destroy property and end human lives scares the crap out of me. I'm definitely much older now than the legal age to own a license, but I still can't get over my fear of driving, no matter how old I am. My girlfriend drives, and even luckier, we've moved into an apartment together. Of course, I still take the bus, walk, or bike when the weather allows it, but I do rely on her driving skills to get me around sometimes. I can easily take the bus to work or places I go often enough to be familiar with the bus routes, but I do use it when I need to. It's April, and there's still snow everywhere. The temperatures are dropping below freezing, and they feel even worse when there's a wind chill. I guess that's what I get for living in Canada. Recently, I had an appointment downtown. I can easily take the bus there and back, but it was snowing wet, heavy snow, and my girlfriend felt bad that I would have to walk to the bus stop and then stand there until the bus came. She was free, so she offered to drive me there, kill some time downtown, then drive me back to our apartment. The road conditions were bad. The roads were bumpy and slippery, and there was this looming gray color surrounding us. Visibility was poor. I was glad I wasn't behind the wheel. When we finally got downtown, she dropped me off in front of the building and then took off to do her own thing. My appointment was finished around 4:30 p.m., so it shouldn't have been dark yet, but it was. My girlfriend picked me up, and we began heading home. The heavy snow fell in clumps on the windshield, and she cursed about not being able to see the road. It made me anxious just to try to watch her navigate through the horrid weather. I reminded myself that I wasn't the driver and tried to relax. We decided to take a different way home. It just seemed very dark, so we tried to stay on roads that were brightly lit. The roads weren't busy. No one wanted to be out in this weather. The drive wasn't much longer, and I was excited to get back into my cozy and safe apartment, but before we could reach our turn, another car zipped in front of us and cut us off. My girlfriend stepped on the brake, and we were thrown forward. The weird thing is, the other car had stopped too. It had cut us off and then suddenly stopped when it was in front of us. We were stuck behind it. Honking the horn at them did nothing, so my girlfriend threw the car in reverse so she could get enough space to go around it. The driver of the car also went in reverse and then parked sideways across the road, completely blocking us. We hadn't really been able to get a clear view of the car through the darkness and heavy snow, but now we could see that the car was pretty damaged. I don't know enough about cars to tell you what kind of car it was. It was just your standard 4-person car, pretty similar to ours. The car had holes in the windows and large dents on the body. One of the tires was flat. The paint was rusting. It was not in good shape. We couldn't go forward to get home unless we went completely off the road. We actually debated using the sidewalk to get around them, but then the driver got out of the car from the driver's side. It was clearly a person. He just opened the door and walked out. He sort of nodded at us, and then just began walking away from the scene, leaving his car sideways in front of us. My girlfriend and I both stepped out of our car, not really sure how we'd best tackle this situation. We weren't sure if we should talk to the guy, call the police, or what. Here's where things got even weirder. Sitting in the driver's seat of the car was a woman. Her head was tilted back, and her mouth was open. We were confused, as we had just watched someone else come out of exactly where this woman was. My girlfriend and I looked at each other for answers but couldn't find any. I tapped on the window of the car. It looked like the only window that wasn't broken. The woman's eyes opened, and she sat up straight. It seemed as though we had just woken her from a nap. She opened the door to talk to us, and then suddenly looked very afraid. Our conversation with her was short. She basically told us that she had fallen asleep on her couch and had no idea why she was in the driver's seat of her car or why it was so damaged when it had been in perfect condition when she had last used it. We told her that a man had gotten out of the car from right where she had been sleeping and walked away. I like to tell myself that it was only due to the poor visibility, but none of us could see any traces of him, not even footsteps in the snow. All she wanted was to go home. This poor woman was terribly frightened. She drove her car as we followed behind her to make sure she would get home safely. She lived in a lovely house with her husband and children, who all noticed that she and her car had disappeared. From there, my girlfriend and I let them deal with it. I don't know if authorities were called or whatever ended up happening, but honestly, I don't think I really want to know. My work day starts at 2 a.m. I'm regularly on a long stretch of highway in the middle of the night. The lights are on detectors, you won't get a green or red until you're in the loop area, then usually within 5 seconds you'll get your green. Main traffic will stay green forever until a car approaches the cross street. About a week ago, I saw a car accident memorial cross pop up at one of the intersections on the way to work. 2 days ago, while driving through this intersection, I got a red. This literally never happens unless there is a vehicle there, which this time there isn't. Not especially suspicious on its own. Then I see a shadow, about 50 feet from the cross. It's not like a cast shadow. It reminded me of that void you see after staring at a bright light or pressing on your eyes. It's not in my peripheral vision, I'm looking right at it. I look around, it stays where it is, rather than moving with my vision like a floater. It's roughly human-shaped and sized, with no arms or anything sticking out. I eventually get my greens and scoot off. I wondered if the accident prompted them to change the light cycles or something, but I haven't gotten a red in the 2 days since then, and I am pretty inconsistent, late, when I'm making that drive. A note on inductive traffic sensors, they detect fluctuations in the magnetic field around them that represent a vehicle. It takes a lot of mass to trip them. A motorcycle doesn't do it most of the time. I'm an electronics hobbyist, so these have always fascinated me. Anyway, I've never heard of shadows described like this. Is this possibly what I saw, or something else, or nothing at all? A year or so ago, I drove up to Georgia to visit my folks. I lived in Florida at the time, and considering the price of plane tickets, driving seemed cheaper. The drive from where I was, not too far from Orlando, to where my family was, an hour outside of Atlanta, was only about 7 hours, not including rest stops. This was my first time doing this trip on my own. I tried leaving early, but I've never been an early riser. I ended up getting on the road around 2 or 3-ish. The drive from Florida into Georgia wasn't too bad. Once you get on the highway, it's basically a 100-mile straight shot into the state. Throw on some music or a podcast, and, honestly, it's not a terrible drive. For the first chunk of the trip, I was having a pretty good time. Around 4 hours in, it started getting dark. By this point, I was nearly to Georgia. However, I was hungry, needed to pee, and my car needed gas. I found a gas station connected to an Arby's and pulled in. I peed, ordered some food, and sat down for a quick meal. I sat in a booth next to a window and scrolled through my phone while eating. Strangely enough, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked up from my phone and surveyed the restaurant. Everyone was just minding their own business. Even then, the feeling persisted. I looked out the window, and there was something in the distance, just standing there. It was challenging to make out so many distinct details from where I was. Based on what I saw, it seemed humanoid, but a bit taller than most humans and with much longer arms than I'd ever seen on a person. The most distinctive part of it, though, were its eyes. 2 bright green eyes sat on its head, shining even through the growing darkness of the setting sun. I grabbed my phone to get a picture of it, but in the second I looked away, it had disappeared. I scarfed down the rest of my food and quickly got some gas, then left as soon as I was able. I tried to calm my unease with some loud music, which did help a bit. I had some rock songs blaring as I passed the state line into Georgia. The highway shifted a bit at this point, getting hilly, a change from the flat roads of Florida. The next couple of hours went by smoothly as I made my way towards my folks' home. Sometimes, though, I swore I saw a flash of green on the side of the road, but I chalked it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. By now, the sun had completely set and it was pitch black out. My initial plan was to stop at a Buc-ee's for some gas and one of their briskets. However, I noticed that my gas tank was emptier than I thought, so I stopped at a gas station on the next exit. This gas station, despite being right off the highway, felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. There were no fast food joints or anything else around. It was just a winding road bordered by woods that led to that dimly lit gas station. No one else was there. I wondered if this was the safest place to be, but then my car helpfully let me know that it was almost out of gas. I sucked it up, drove up to a gas pump, and started filling up my car. At least gas was cheaper in Georgia. As I pumped gas, I looked around. Not too far from the edge of the gas station, right by the woods, I saw two familiar specks of green. The dim gas station lights highlighted the figure's silhouette, tall with abnormally long arms. This time, I noticed two new things. First, the figure's arms seemed to go all the way to the ground. Second, thanks to the light, I noticed some color on the bottom half of the thing. A dark gray body with some unsettling splotches of dark red. I stared at it, barely breathing. It just stood there, staring back. I felt the gas stop pumping, turned to see that I had filled my tank, and then turned back to see nothing. The thing was gone. Again. As I opened my car's door, I heard a loud, animalistic cry near where I saw the being. There was a running narration in my brain telling me, ignore it, get back on the road, get away, and don't be an idiot. Against my better judgment, I got in my car, drove over to where I saw the being, and prayed that I wouldn't be killed. As my headlights illuminated the area, I thankfully didn't see any green eyes. The sight that greeted me wasn't much better. Right where I saw the deer earlier, there was instead a deer lying on its side in a pool of blood. Chunks were torn out of its body, and through those tears, I could see the animal's organs and bones. Its head was twisted a full 180 degrees around, and its eyes were frozen open in sheer terror. I noticed what appeared to be bloody, human-like footprints, bordered by thick lines trailing off from the deer and leading to the nearby woods. I drove away as fast as possible and got back on the highway. I was going 90 on the highway and getting faster with each second. I just focused on getting to my folks' place. I wasn't making any more stops. As I drove, I jumped at every green light I saw or thought I saw on the side of the road. Unfortunately for me, the lights I should have been worried about at that moment were flashing red and blue. A cop car was behind me, and I made it clear I should pull over. I looked at my speedometer. 130 miles per hour. Duck. I pulled over on the side of the road, the cop car pulling up behind me. I got out my license and registration as the cop approached. He knocked on my window. I lowered it. "You know how fast you were going, son?" he asked in a thick southern accent. A part of me wanted to make a smart-ass comment, like, the speed limit? A part of me wanted to explain what was going on. A part of me just wanted to comply and get this over with quickly. Instead, my mouth opened and closed like I was a fish on dry land. The cop raised an eyebrow. "You okay, kid?" I think it was supposed to sound like genuine concern, but I heard a threat. I got the impression that if I told him what I saw, he'd think I was on drugs or something. I wasn't on anything, and had, in fact, never even so much as smoked a joint, but I doubt the cop would believe me. So, instead, I got my bearings, cleared my throat, and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I handed him my license and registration. "Sorry, officer. I'm coming up from Florida to see my parents, and I left a bit late. I'm supposed to be there by 10, and, well, I needed to rush." He looked over the documents and nodded. "I think your folks rather you get there safe, even if you're a bit tardy." I nodded a bit more quickly than normal. "I know, sorry. I've never been pulled over before, so I'm a bit nervous." The officer went to his car to check my documents and print a ticket. Off in the distance, I swore I saw a flash of green. A few minutes later, the cop came back with a ticket and handed it to me, along with my license and registration. "Well, don't make a habit of it. Be careful, okay?" Far behind the cop, those green eyes stared at me. "I will," I said. When the cop got back in his car, the eyes were gone. The rest of the drive on the highway was done at a steady 70 miles per hour. The entire time, I felt like that creature was following me and that I should go faster. Eventually, after a paranoid hour of driving, I got off the highway and started down the back roads. The back roads in the area consisted of long, winding roads with very few streetlights. On some stretches, the only reason I could see anything was because of my headlights. The roads were bordered by woods, with trees that blocked out the moon. I tried not to let my paranoia and fear get to me. I tried thinking it over logically. I saw that thing miles ago. There's no way it could have followed me, especially with how fast I was going. Those green eyes I saw when I got pulled over could have been anything. Besides, I didn't see anything after I got pulled over. A voice in the back of my head nagged at me. It could be hiding, biding its time. You saw it in Florida, and it followed you to Georgia. It moves fast. Or maybe there are more of these things. Maybe there are dozens, hundreds, or thousands of them just waiting to get you. I took deep breaths, trying to calm down. I looked at the navigator on my phone. I was only half an hour away from my parents' home. I could make it. Just as I was thinking those happy thoughts, something suddenly appeared on the road in front of me. I swerved, narrowly avoiding it, before going off the road into the grass. Luckily, I didn't crash into anything. I turned on my hazard lights and tried to compose myself. I looked in my rearview mirror to see what the hell I almost hit, and in the flashing red light of my car, I saw the broken body of a deer. Behind it, I saw the lower half of something very tall with freakishly long arms. I saw its feet, human-like but with toenails ending in sharp points. Its long arms terminated in two sharp, bony claws. Its skin was gray, and under the red light, the fresh blood on its body glowed. I watched as it bent down to the deer corpse, and I saw its face. Green eyes set in a skeletal head, its mouth a perfect circle. From that mouth, a long, dark tongue emerged, dotted with knife-like protrusions. Its tongue started slicing into the deer's body, and chunks of flesh and muscle were being cut from the corpse. The tongue slid back into the creature's mouth, with bits of deer held within it. It used its claws to grab larger pieces of the deer and shove them into its mouth. Blood splattered over the body and the street. I sat frozen in terror, only able to watch the disgusting sight. It stopped eating the deer, then turned and looked directly at me, its green eyes glowing in the night and blood and viscera dripping from its maw. I slammed on the gas and got back on the road, driving as fast as possible away from the creature. I kept my eyes straight ahead, worried that if I looked behind me, I'd see that thing chasing me. Thankfully, I got to my parents' house unscathed. When I got in, my parents could see I was visibly shaken. I just told them the drive was longer than I thought it'd be and left it at that. I stayed up in Georgia for a couple of weeks. I never left the house during the first few days and kept the blinds in my room closed the entire time. A part of me worried that I'd see those green eyes staring at me in the night. My parents eventually coaxed me into going out with them during the day. Incidentally, we drove by where I saw the creature. There was no proof that what I saw that night happened. No deer corpse or even a bloodstain. A part of me wondered if I imagined all of it. I never saw it during the rest of my stay or on the drive back to Florida. Over time, I convinced myself that I must have imagined the entire thing. Future drives to Georgia helped me prove that to myself, even if I still did jump at green lights on the side of the road. A month or so ago, I had to move in with my parents. It's a long story, but to put it simply, I was having job troubles in Florida and couldn't stay. I packed my stuff in my car and drove up there. That drive was, thankfully, uneventful. Honestly, that first month was pretty uneventful outside of the actual move and job hunt. I soon found a job nearby. Nothing special, but a decent way to make a few bucks. Last night, while driving home from work, I had to stop to get gas. I ended up at some middle-of-nowhere gas station on the way home. I'd stopped there a few times here and there. It was creepy at night, sure, but it was safe and a decently priced gas. As I was pumping gas, I looked out into the nearby woods and saw something that froze my blood. 2 green eyes. Wait, not just 2. I realized this with dawning horror. Dozens of green eyes. They all stared directly at me. So my grandpa recently passed away, and I remembered a story he used to love to tell. This was back in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He was driving down a road in the middle of a forest in the mountains in Pakistan. I'm in the middle of nowhere, heading back home from some trips. While he was driving, he saw a man wave at him, standing at the side of the road. It was dark and foggy, so you couldn't really see his face or anything. So my grandpa thought he might as well help the guy, he was in the middle of nowhere. So he stopped, and the guy got into the back seat. My grandpa asked him if he wanted to come sit in the front. He declined. My grandpa just kept on driving. The guy started mumbling and talking to himself. My grandpa looked back, but the guy, in a woman's voice, said, "I don't think that's a good idea, you don't want to look at me." My grandpa freaked out, turned back, and kept driving. Some time passed until the guy, in yet another voice, asked to stop, right next to an old graveyard. Scared but relieved, my grandpa slammed the brakes. The guy then offered to pay. My grandpa said no, but he insisted. The guy gave my grandpa a 5 rupee bill, he kept it, and the guy got out of the car. My grandpa drove a little before looking back to see that the guy wasn't there anymore. My grandma kept those 5 rupees, but unfortunately, we lost them. This is a real-life 100% story that happened to me. In 2003, I met a guy who said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up in was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state. I never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that have been happening in the countryside. So my, now ex, decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see most of the US. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have advancements in technology and the ability to binge watch their favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on their phones to keep themselves occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had were either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be creepy. And keeping a bit of anonymity is the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for his safety, and me since I was a baby, Barley 20 Yo, and I'm from Alaska, so mine ended up being Northern Exposure. During your time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people and see a ton of crazy stuff. And I do mean a ton of crazy shit. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. Yano, like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even goat. But this time, was one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life, and when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like, flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not all there? That was this guy. Something about him made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough that we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone, so we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it. That voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as the Joker in the Batman movie. There was something just off about it. And it gave me chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete, the color of our truck. Where are you headed?" My ex hollered back, "We were heading to Arkansas." The driver said he was going the same way, asked if he could tag along with us, and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black, had a brow, and was a cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry boxes from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back because, by that time, we would have run out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure, even though I totally didn't want to meet this guy, that my ex had become friends with him, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at and told him we would meet up for a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radio could no longer reach him. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on and waited for. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime and lots of bad stuff happen, so we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited, and eventually we had enough time to take another load, so we headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. But we chalked it up to drama on the radio after all. We had quite literally nothing better to do than make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about it and even brought it up to Maniac, and he just laughed and said it must be one real sick duck doing it. It must just be a story, because if it were true, they would have caught him already. I bet he has even left fingerprints or semen at the crime scene. With as bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. It seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way, and we went ours. After a while, I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later. We were in Mississippi, and we heard a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day, and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop off our trailer and head out to Bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't talking to him, and he absolutely hated the silent treatment. Our load was to be delivered in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. Win/win. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him. But I was still very on edge. Now I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house, and I was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6 feet 3 inches and about 280 pounds, so, in theory, we could take him if need be. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in the trucks, and if you were caught by Dot, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J petrol station that was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we get ready to fuel up. We showered and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food. And I waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much noise at this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted by a SHT ton of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in shit they are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops at a truck stop go hand in hand. But this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying J's, so it could probably fit about 80 trucks and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could find a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot of lizards, even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk into alone. I was walking with my ex, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird that he was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers because that is yet another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. Gut-wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our nighttime entertainment and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was. The chatter was about all the cops, the ambulance fire truck, and Dot. All the commotion was basically across from us, but 2 rows up. People were saying there were a lot of dead lizards. It was terrible. Like gnarly. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jump out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase some things cannot be unseen. This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer and the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, was cuffed, his head hung limp, and his forehead was on the back of the seat. He was crying big, heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door. He wailed that he had nothing to do and prayed to God to forgive him for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left and just decided to pull out of his space. While she was freaking attached. She got ripped apart. Right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was something you would probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back, zero ducks given that I should have waited for my ex because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. So I ran to the truck stop at full speed. I was going to get sick, and I would rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck, stopped looking for me, and said he would walk me back to it so I could get some sleep. Yeah, right, like, I could sleep after seeing that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out of the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone at the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety in numbers and not going anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the truck. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face was that she had a red rag in her mouth and the 100 miles per hour tape around her wrists tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because bruises had formed on her stomach and face, and mascara was running down her cheeks. The smell was like rotten meat and blood. It makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real and that it was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad, for the time being, to have it out of my head. Fast forward, and it was February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps, and we were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole-in-the-wall mom and pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. "Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way?" The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot. An old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted. "Maniac, hey man, where the hell have you been? Why did you stand us up there, good buddy?" My ex radioed back. "Oh man, you know how it is? Cops make me a bit uneasy, and I'd rather not get ducking caught." He said it with a chuckle. "Caught? What do you mean caught?" My ex was questioned. "Don't worry about it, you just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something terrible to happen to her, like all of those other girls." He trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal was high, it had to be in the same ducking truck stop to ping so high. Silence. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing in the mic. "You know, with all the bad things I have been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Hey, those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with drugs and sex like they do. It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. Silence. His voice was even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended at the truck stop. Only God and the devil himself can judge me for my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity. We looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time, I was scared, like truly scared. A dust cloud rolled up to the truck stop, and this dark, menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed in just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that ducking disgusting smile at us as he put the mic on his lips. Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf and Northern Exposure. His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he has actually been ridding the world of its sins. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I can tell you one thing, though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6 blade on me at all times just in case I ever ran into Maniac. The following is a true story relayed to me by a friend. I will refer to the lady as Anna and our mutual friend who was also present as Jess. Years after my last story, I moved to eastern Idaho, a land of wide low valleys surrounded by rolling sagebrush steppe hills, with the Grand Tetons, Caribou, Targhee, and Sawtooth Mountains as epic backdrops against the sky. It's God's country here, and I have loved every day here, even when there are several feet of snow and temperatures going below -10. I've also made some friends while up here, 2 of whom are Anna and Jess. Anna and Jess have known each other for years and frequently hang out together, going on adventures of all sorts. One fair summer day, they decided to take Jess's Beatermobile on a little cross-country adventure and explore the hilly sagebrush desert about 5 miles out of town. This is a really fun activity because the trails are nothing insane and can even be traversed by the most domesticated automobiles, until you get a few miles in. So the two were plodding around for an hour or so, going deeper into the hills and into some of the more unforgiving roads, but Jess didn't care too much and was just gunning it when he got to a difficult area. After going up a steep hill, the road goes down into a broad glen, where it opens up and flattens out. There are some rock outcroppings scattered around the glen and tall grass. I know all this because I have been to the exact same place in my truck. Cruising down the road, they were gazing around, enjoying the scenery, when Anna saw something that almost made her scream. Just off the side of the road, some 100 yards away, there was an adult man kneeling in the dirt. There was no car around, there was no bicycle around, there were no other people, just this man and them. Anna pointed this out to Jess, and he slowed down but did not stop the car. The man was looking at them, still kneeling on the side of the dirt road. Anna then noticed his hands were behind his back, like he had been tied up. She pointed this out to Jess, who then suggested they go see if he needed help. Anna pointed out that was a stupid idea and said to floor it past the man. Jess stomped the accelerator, and they took off. As they got closer, Anna said she could see the man was older, probably in his 30s or 40s, and was Hispanic or Native American, Blackfoot and Shoshone tribes around here, with dark hair. As they advanced, Anna said she could see him mouthing some words but could not hear them or read his lips, and as they drew close, Anna closed her eyes, afraid of what she might see. Jess told me he was too busy focusing on the road to spare a glance. The two flew past the man, leaving a massive cloud of dust in their wake. Anna said that after they put some distance between them, she looked in the side view mirror, and as the dust cloud dispersed from where they had come, she could still see the distant figure still kneeling, arms behind him, looking toward their car. They floored it all the way back into town, freaking out and watching their backs all the way there. Anna said she did not call the police because she was afraid it was perhaps a gang-related incident, perhaps that man was about to get executed, and she didn't want to be tied into it as a witness. Anna kept an eye on local news for any insights but saw nothing. Lots of migrant workers come and go around here due to the immense amount of agriculture in these parts. Most owe money to cartels who help them cross the border or work for them, selling narcotics as supplementary income. Maybe Anna came across some poor guy who had crossed the cartel, maybe it was a native out praying, maybe it was just some weird-ass hobo. All I know is that this story adds another reason as to why I always carry